Live, and we're live. Hey everyone, welcome back to episode of Fuel to the Fire. It's been a few months since we've done a stream, so I know a lot of you out there have been patiently waiting. Tonight, we've got the whole crew here, and we're going to go over the video that Keith Woods posted, I think 5 days ago now, titled, "Is Nietzscheanism the Answer?" We're going to kind of run through that. I think it kind of rubbed most of us here the wrong way. We weren't not butthurt about it, but just think the guy kind of went pretty off track. And we're going to go through quite a few points that were made in the video. So first up, we got Dranger here. Dranger, say hello. I see you're muted, but do your best.
How's everybody doing tonight? I'm glad to be back on here. It has been quite a while since we did this, so I'm kind of excited to kind of hop in here and have a good conversation about this. I'm pretty passionate about Nietzsche and a lot of his ideas, so yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Good. What's up, Grizzly?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for waiting. We're back. I am butthurt by Keith Woods' video, so take that back. No, I'm not really, but it should be a good discussion. He made a lot of points that I'd like to touch on. I like a lot of what Nietzsche says, so kind of dive into why I like those things. But it should be a good show.
All right, awesome. Next up, we got Will Lavar. Say hello, Will.
Hey, how's it going? I actually came on here to defend Keith Woods tonight, so I'm going to be leading the opposition. But no, it's good to be with you guys tonight.
Hey, thanks, man. And we've got Alex Johnson up. We haven't talked to Alex for a little while here, so we're happy to have him back. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, it's good to be back on and talk about a very interesting subject. Yeah.
All right. Well, this video that Keith posted, I've been kind of sensing this sort of thing coming for a while. I don't know if you guys watch his weekend live streams that he does, but every once in a while he's kind of, I've only watched a few of them, but I've seen call-ins where they sort of ask him these questions about, master-slave morality, Nietzschean thought. And you can tell he's kind of got something to say, or he's had something to say about it that he hasn't, kind of gotten off of his chest. So this was, when I saw this video, I'm like, okay, this is what he's been kind of building up towards over the past few months with a lot of the off-color comments that he's made about it. And it was good that I was happy that I got to hear his real take on it, but it surprised me how much how much of it he understood and how well he was able to articulate it, and then how fucking wrong he was. Yeah, I was like, he was making all the points that I just wanted to say, yes, you're correct. You're interpreting that right, but I agree with Nietzsche and on this stuff. So that was kind of my takeaway from it. So I think that Keith did do like a good analysis. It's just every single conclusion he makes throughout this 36-minute video, I was just diametrically opposed to.
Now, can I just state one thing that he said towards the end of his video, which just in case we fall into that trap that he kind of laid out for us. Well, this is just one important little thing. So he said, the Nietzscheans, they won't critique this in an epistemological way. They're going to do a reductionist kind of normalist material kind of view of it. And people who are approaching this aren't into philosophy. They're not really kind of genned into like the whole philosophy sphere. So, their takes are going to be really materialistic. I would contend that we're not going to be doing that.
Well, I don't want to get too sidetracked here at the beginning, but yeah, that did look as well as his assertion that all Nietzscheans, especially in our spheres, are materialists, which I found laughable because that's so far from the truth. And that kind of tells me he doesn't really have a grasp on native European metaphysics, or even Christian metaphysics for that matter. So.
Yep, you sounded a little bit garbled on your microphone there for a second.
Yeah, dude, your audio went to shit again. I don't know if maybe your headset's too close to your mouth. Not to get all graphic here, but I'm guessing it's something like that.
How's that? Is that better?
1,000 times better. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, I was saying that yeah, not to get too sidetracked here, but one thing that did bug me was his assertion that all Nietzscheans, especially within our sphere, are materialists, and that kind of tells me he doesn't really have a full grasp of native European spirituality, paganism, or Christian metaphysics for that matter. So I did find that interesting.
That was a really interesting thing, and I can disagree and agree with him. We'll probably get into that a little bit later on. That was, I think, like at the 20-minute mark that he started making those comments that if you're Nietzschean, you're automatically materialist. And I know, Will, you're gonna kind of drool over this because I mean this was so obviously not true with the NSDAP, right? They incorporated Nietzscheanism and all sorts of mysticism, really from all around the world, and the two weren't contradictory whatsoever. So that point, maybe Nietzsche himself was a little bit made some comments, kind of leaning towards materialism in his way of being anti-Christian. But I mean, come on, that was kind of a ridiculous assertion that anybody who's pro Nietzsche is going to be a materialist.
Well, I mean, if we want to even take it back to the beginning and not go in reverse, if we take it to the beginning of the video, he makes the claim that Christianity has a better kind of, how do you say?
I have the
a
direct quote.
resistance or,
He said, Christianity,
yeah,
for all
go
its
for it.
faults, is more of a challenge to modernity than Nietzscheism is.
That's it. A minute 20. If anybody's wants to pull that up, I was planning on playing some of the audio clips, but I've got headphones on right now, and that might get a little dicey to try to have audio go out two different places in my computer.
Yeah, I did pull up some direct quotes. So if you have something that you comment on and I have the quote, I'll definitely push that quote out.
I would definitely say to give it a try, Dagus, and if the quality's bad out there for you guys, let us know and we will skip that format for the rest of the stream. But
Okay.
yeah,
If you guys can hear it, then the audience is going to be able to hear it. Okay. So let me give this a shot. I'm going to change I'm on Windows tonight, so I'm going to change my default playback device. I know this is what everyone wants to hear when they tune into a live stream, is people trying to figure out their computer shit. Okay, switched over to speakers.
I want to talk about for a while is popularity of Nietzscheanism in
How well can you guys hear that?
political spaces.
Really well.
Popularity more.
Oh, but now your audio is coming through. Your guys' audio is coming through the wrong thing now. So let me see if I can. Sorry, guys, we should have done this before the stream, but kind of had other things going on. Big Cat Kayla says, will to tech support. All right, I'm going to try this, guys, without headphones. And if you start getting echoes or anything like that, just let me know, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, so here we go. I'm going to a minute 20. This is where he makes his comments on Christianity being a bigger threat to the system than
Modernity to Nietzscheanism. With the Nietzschean perspective that I think with the Christian perspective.
Sorry, let me go a little further back.
On Nietzsche. And that's an interesting place for someone like me to be because, personally I'm not a Christian, but I actually have much more problems with the Nietzschean perspective than I do with the Christian perspective. And it's maybe a controversial thing to say now, but I think that Christianity, for all its faults, is much more of a challenge to modernity than Nietzscheanism.
All right, we'll stop right there. So, okay, any comments on that specifically? Anybody have any?
I mean, yeah, I'll allow someone. Yeah, you guys go first.
it's obviously true. I mean, look around. All of the priesthood and the Vatican. I know everyone's going to spurg, or not everyone, but some people might spurg about the Vatican too, and this not being the true Catholicism or true Christianity for that matter. But to say or make the assertion that Christianity somehow is a bigger challenge to modernity without even fully grasping or understanding Christian philosophy, I think that's a pretty interesting and bold statement by him because, I mean, even watching some of his older videos, he himself said that he isn't too familiar with Christian text and scripture. And this is why I encourage people, I encourage pagans even and even atheists to read the Bible, because there's a lot of information in there that can kind of broaden your worldview and give you a better understanding of what Christianity really is. It transcends mere cultural Christianity, which a lot of people like to assert. So, yeah, I found that very laughable, to say the least.
I did begrudgingly, on your request, read L Bible in recent times, and whoa.
You read the whole thing, dude? The whole Bible?
From cover to cover.
Genesis to Revelation, Grizzly read
Good
it
job,
all.
man. I probably would have read like 3 pages of Genesis and been like, you know what, fuck this. I'm done.
Dude, it's there's a section in the Old Testament at the beginning. It's so fucking boring. It's just going through the lineage of Abraham. It's the most tedious and boring
Yeah.
fucking read. But
Yeah, I'd probably rather read the Silmarillion or something just totally.
well, yeah, at least the Silmarillion's interesting.
But
All right.
my question is that how does he reconcile that with sort of ethnic and sort of the stratification that we kind of believe in, so hierarchy and difference between peoples and the values attributed to those differences? How can you say that today what we have right now, that Christianity would oppose that? Anything within the Christian doctrine would oppose sort of this worship of inclusion that we see dominating our society right now, especially even the Catholic Church, and I mean the church in general is either defenseless or is completely on board with some of these ideas that he is attacking or has attacked in the past. So how can he say that Christianity is capable of fighting this in an effective way, or even in any way? But while at the same time, you can say that what we have today is in some ways a delineation of Christianity.
honestly, I would like to chalk it up
morality
to.
and all that.
I honestly would like to chalk it up to Keith coming from a leftist background and him not really being exposed to right-wing or conservative, traditional-minded philosophy before. Because, I mean, he said himself he came from kind of a leftist, anarchist background. And, I mean, a lot of these ideas are kind of new to him. So
He also said like a lot of leftists prop up Nietzsche. I was like, who does that in the left?
Yeah, I don't do that from leftist circles. When I was kind of tangentially leftist for a couple of years, I mean, I did not hear people talking about Nietzsche. I think that's far-fetched. He says at 415 that he thinks that the post-left anarchism is the proper interpretation of Nietzschean thought.
Yeah.
That seems very fucking off to me.
That was ridiculous to me. That was when I realized that he's not a serious person. Listening to that, like I haven't listened to very much. I think I've seen clips of him, like maybe like 5 minutes altogether before this, but I watched that whole thing. And the minute I heard him say that the proper interpretation of Nietzsche is post-left, essentially liberal anarchism, I was like, this guy has never read Nietzsche. Like if you read The Twilight of the Idols, it is basically a clean cut version of Might is Right. It is inherently illiberal. It is openly illiberal. It is illiberal to the point where he even says this, like these are illiberal ideas. These are anti-liberal ideas. This has nothing to do with the modern paradigm.
If I was to summarize like Nietzsche's concept, and this is a really dumbed down version, it would be like the most against egalitarian principles, such as you find in the left, such as you find in Christianity, that it's almost laughable that someone would even say that if they knew anything about Nietzsche. Like I have memes that I've generated throughout the eras in the Nietzsche sphere that I'm like, I'm a pulp fan of Nietzsche, and I'm like, equality's a lie, ha 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 ha. Like this kind of thing. It's like true. Like he was like never into this idea of egalitarian. It was always a man or an overman or a principle of power over the weak. And yeah, if you're Christian or if you have that mindset of weak over the powerful, like the left does, literally, then it would be abhorrent. Like if a leftist saw Nietzsche, it would be abhorrent.
So wait, Grizzly, you're saying it's always been about power relations?
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that.
Always has been.
Well, that's something really important. That's something really important that he missed. And it kind of feels like he learned about Nietzsche from a Reddit, like a subreddit. That's the way I felt when I was listening to the video, because deeming the conclusion of Nietzsche's work as post-left anarchism is crazy. Nietzsche specifically defined these sorts of people because he was dealing with them to a certain extent in Weimar Germany. He deemed these people as the last man, meaning the man that would die with the system, that would not live out and become the beast that he always talked about. He was very specific about these types, and if they do glom onto some ideas, which I think his argument is that Nietzsche, some of the Nietzschean thought process helped people like Foucault create their postmodern viewpoint that the left gloms onto, but that in no way defines the body of work or the idea that Nietzsche was trying to portray.
Django, I just want to credit you for that, saying it was a Reddit tier argument, because it sounded like it was a Reddit tier argument when I was listening to it.
Okay, I got a few things to respond to. So I think that Keith does have a philosophy education. He was in college for a while. I'm guessing he studied philosophy. He says he was at that time reading like 100 books a year. That may be true. I don't know. The guy seems like he's sharp to me. On this specific video, he was way the hell off. But he also said in the video that Nietzsche was a starting point with philosophy too. So there might have been some misinterpretation there where he was kind of, people start out their lives as leftists and maybe reading Nietzsche when he was still a leftist, maybe he got this bizarre interpretation of it. But ultimately the thing that Nietzsche was writing in the 1880s, right? So he was on the forefront of seeing this new liberal egalitarian paradigm come to reality. He was around when people were writing about these ideas, and democracy was this kind of new finagled fad. And he was seeing, he was peering into the world of 100 years later and imagining what it was going to look like. In a sense, it was almost like he was like a dystopian sci-fi novelist in a way.
He was a prophet. He was a prophet, and he was aware. He was self-aware enough to realize that his in his own words. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he said he actually answered. He did a critique of what I can't remember this guy's name. Whatever his critique was, his specific answer was, "Do not take full account of my work for the first adopters of it, because they will not be the intention of what I'm saying." He talked about exactly the way the future was going to turn out. He prophesied nihilism, and we are indeed in the age of nihilism now. I can't see any other way around it.
He gets blamed for creating nihilism, right? Nihilism gets, in an ironic twist of fate, gets attributed to him.
It is weird that's attributed to him, but not Evola's work, which anyway. But yeah, that is strange. And this stream isn't about shitting on Keith Woods. I introduced a couple of people in this panel to Keith Woods. I respect Keith Woods a lot. So this is like it was a surprise to me to see that video, because so much of it was like, I mean, what are you saying?
So I think Keith Woods is the epitome of the last man. That's just my own personal view. It doesn't reflect anybody's opinion. But
yeah, interestingly, the last man, Nietzsche's term, the last man, was basically like William Luther Pierce's Lemmings, where he's saying like 80% of people are so attached to comfort and security that they basically have this herd mind that can just be guided in whatever direction the elites want it to. And that is the world that we were sort of born into. We've got a million different names for people who are unthinking, just favor comfort and security above any higher principles, and can sort of just be led around like a marionette on strings. We call them NPCs. We call them sorts of names. But we are now living in a sea among these people, and we sort of stand out as the outliers in the society because we still have the capacity for critical thought and whatever. And yeah, basically we're living in the world that he prophesized, and for that very reason, I mean, the guy has quite a lot to offer us in critiquing modernity and understanding it. So to finish off my point, the first thing that Alex said was that he alluded to something like, how can Christianity as it is today possibly be a threat to modernity when the modern world was born out of it? I think that's absolutely true. This is like saying that the parent is destined to dethrone the child instead of the other way around. That like Saturn is going to dethrone Zeus. No, the child, the successor, is a successor, and liberal ethics come out of Christianity, and there are kind of no two ways around that. Communism and liberalism are sort of the offspring of the Christian ethical system.
Yeah, this is a take that we all mostly share too. I mean, this is something we talked about, like even about the whole 50s cultural Christian movement in America, and people wonder why women were so easily swayed to go to radical feminism because of something that that we were talking about, this sort of weird repression of natural human urges and desires. And that doesn't mean to be fucking whores or thoughts or anything, but it kind of stems from that culture of anti-humanism, where it's like they have this superficial kind of view of how humans interact with each other, and it's unnatural, and it kind of leads to a radical kind of overturn of like what their view of morals and ethics are for that society. I don't know, what would you say about that?
Yeah, and I think that actually is an underlying problem where people view, or the mass majority of people view pain or suffering as an inherent bad that must be expurgated, that must somehow be conquered, when in reality, pain and struggle, as we know, are the pressure that creates the diamond. They are as important to life as birth is. They are as important to life as the positive aspects of things. And I think the idea of the Dionysian aspect that has been bastardized by these talking heads that Keith Woods likes to pal around with, such as Radix and all them. They've taken Dionysian ideas and turned them into like perversion and kind of this like degenerate modern pursuit. And in reality, what the Dionysian revelation is that all senses are an expression of life and should be celebrated. Mm-hmm. Right. And so what that means is that the pain of childbirth is a beautiful thing that we must celebrate and that we must honor, and that the pain of war is something that we must celebrate and honor. It is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. It is a part of our senses. It is something that we experience. It is natural, and there is no good or bad when it comes to senses.
Yeah,
and that doesn't mean do what you will. That means that within your life, in your stoic path, the senses are all good.
Yeah, I actually agree with that.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to point out is like he had such a pulse on what is nature, what is natural, what is basically just seen to be observed and where we exist, like in the physical realm. Like he, to me, it was like he looked at things how they are and his in humankind, and he said this is how it is in nature. And this is how it should. I mean, this is how it inevitably will be in mankind, and it's 100% true. I've never read something that alludes to nature or the natural ways within Nietzscheism that I necessarily disagree with wholeheartedly. I'm like, yes, yes, period.
Yeah, it's not an apologetic for weakness. It does not make excuses for weakness. It states that that strength comes from endurance, the ability to overcome, and that those who are able to do so have a higher position within any order, social order. And
Well, that's another thing that differentiates people with a kind of Christian moral objectivist view to someone who's a little more moral relativist, pagan view like us. I mean, you look at somebody. I mean, Christians rely on an outside force for their strength, whereas people like us, or Nietzscheans, or pagans, or whatever label you want to call us, we try to encourage reliance of the self, reliance of self-strength, and self-overcoming. That's a huge differentiation.
Yeah, and just to quote something that Nietzsche said, the world itself is the will to power and nothing else, and the will, and you yourself are will to power and nothing else. And if you're not that, like, what are you? A pursuit of something weak, something to be subjugated, something to be chastised or kowtowed to, or kowtowed, like, to propel you into kowtowing against someone more strong? Like, what does that mean? Like, if you disagree with that principle by itself, I'm like, okay, so I mean, this is going to be hyperbolic, but you are inherently saying I promote weakness above strength, obviously, which is not
Which is
what
something that the Bible. This is why I say I encourage everybody in
meekness. Yeah, the
here.
meek shall inherit
Yes,
the earth.
I
Yeah.
encourage everybody in here to read the Bible, because there's scripture after scripture that talks about this very concept, and people seem to negate it or ignore it for some reason within our circles. Like, there is actual scripture in there that props up this mode of thinking and stuff. So yeah, this isn't something that we're making up here. It's in scripture. It's in the Bible. This is why I encourage people to read it for
When Nietzsche
themselves.
identified the Christians as embodying a slave morality, I mean, he's absolutely right. And when Drenger was going off and saying, "How can you possibly see this as a post-left anarchism? That's absurd." Well, because the post-left anarchism is kind of fitting into that Christian slave morality where I mean, okay, so first of all, I don't really, maybe there's some nuance to post-left anarchism that I don't get. Whatever, doesn't really matter. If we talk about leftism generally, or radical leftism, there are some common themes. And one is that they're trying to find a post-scarcity utopia, right? That they're trying to find a way that all the masses can have all of their basic needs met, and everybody can sort of get along, that the society won't have these great conflicts, and more or less suffering gets ended. And this is, I mean, Nietzsche goes, I mean, we can pull out like 40 billion quotes where
Well, in fact, I just this once, like, in fact, like, in the post left, they're basically saying the weaker you are, the more of a hierarchy you have above others.
That's right. That's the victim hierarchy of victimhood that
Yeah,
we were all
and
talking about years ago.
very quickly, I just want to clarify for people that don't understand, communism and the radical liberalism as that we see now is it's a form of Protestantism. It's a type of Christianity that has denied God and denied hierarchy and created this cult. But all of the trappings of a degenerate and decadent Christianity are there. And that's why it's so powerful. It's a very strong form of godless Christianity. So is modern liberalism, and the original liberal principles are all based on Anglican principles and Lutheran principles as well. So it is
Absolutely.
indeed for people that don't understand. I just clarified a little bit deeper. Lutheranism and Anglicanism, and in America, different forms, an eclectic group of Protestantism created what we now see as liberalism, and also spawned communism. And that's not up for debate. That's not like that's not anti-Christian bashing. That is, it can be heuristically proven.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of what I was alluding to. It's like the post left. I mean, liberals in general just take that principle of, if you're weak, you have more power. I mean, this is a direct embodiment of some scripture I've read from. Thank you, Will, for telling me to read the Bible, from the Bible.
Yeah, well, I mean it when I say people should read it, especially if you espouse to adhere to that philosophy or worldview. You better fucking read what your worldview is based off of, because Christianity and most Abrahamic religions, for that matter, are very distinctive in the sense that you have to abide by the text. Like, it's very rigid. You do have to abide by the text, and a lot of other religions that are non-Abrahamic don't have that rigid structure.
All right, all very good points. I want to bring it back to some of the things that Keith said here. I don't think that we can go through this sequentially anymore. I was planning on just going, point by point through the video, but this is these each topic that we're going to bring up is going to be like its own Pandora's box. So we're going to have to jump around here. To what was just said, I think that the next thing to talk about is sorry, 1 second. I got the motorcycle going by, distracted me. Keith basically says that the elites have turned Nietzschean, and this is the problem with the modern world. That they've gone, that Nietzscheanism has sort of been sucked, sort of absorbed by the culture, and the elites have embraced it, and that's why they're being such big meanies to us right now. Is because they've read Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where Nietzsche is comparing the commoners to the cattle or something like that, or the herd, right? Where he's sort of teaching people to have this predator not prey mindset and learning to despise the prey way of thinking. And I think that despising the lower forms of thought or lower ways of being is kind of needed. I'll give you guys a kind of a strange example. For a while, I lived in a college town, and I was a little bit of kind of left leaning back then. And I remember realizing that all the college kids in that town were all very, very friendly with the homeless people, but all of the locals, the people that actually lived in that place, were fucking cruel to the homeless, at least from my perspective then. And what I ended up realizing is that they hate those people because they could have easily become those homeless people with a few different decisions in their life. If they didn't have the structure, if they didn't have the discipline, if they weren't holding the values that they held, they would easily, growing up in these poor neighborhoods that they were in, they could have become meth heads. They could have ended up living on the streets. They could have ended up being, welfare kings or queens or whatever. So what people do to not fall into what they don't want to become is they learn to despise the people that are that. And I think that that's very, very normal, and it should be something that we just sort of, adapt, like where we just get used to hating on lower nature. Just like here's a good example. You know how everybody we've like been shitting on like boomer takes or crappy conservative arguments and shit like this. Like, one of the reasons that we go so hard on that is because we have to self-monitor and make sure that we don't fall back into that or become that. And that's sort of like us despising, the lower nature or the weaker version of ourselves. What do you guys think about all that?
Yeah, again, I think that ties into Nietzschean's kind of true consideration of nature and the natural world. I mean, it's hard to contest that if you confront a bull head on, you're going to win as a human without anything other than your body. Yeah, that's a little bit of a, I guess, an exaggeration, but it's really not. Like, why be a sheep when you can be a wolf? Why be less powerful when you can be more? Why be a predator than be a prey? I mean,
because universal morality, Grizzly. Because universal morality.
Yeah, because if you become a predator, you're violating the moral code, right? Because
sure, but the highest moral code is the highest moral code that exists in nature is the want and will to survive.
See, that's what moral objectivists will always lose, and there's a reason. Obviously, there's a reason for that. Is that the function of morality is a function of power dynamics, and the people in charge dictate morality to the group, to the controlled group, in order to keep them in line and create a functioning society. That doesn't deem it a good or bad, it just is. And so when groups glom onto the idea of objective morality, they will never reach the position of power to impose their morality, because they're living in this fantasy delusion that their morality somehow has merit beyond power. And so when someone takes the idea of objective morality and fights against someone who is espousing and acting upon the ideas of subjective and power-based morality, like I said, they will lose in the same way that a fair fighter will lose against a cheater, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't in that situation, the cheater isn't bad, the cheater won. And the cheater was
let's say
able
we
to
put a boxer
exert
against a
power.
kickboxer. The boxer's going to say, well, no blows below the belt. That's unethical. And the kickboxer is going to kick him 3 times in the leg, and the fight's going to be over.
Dringer's
Right.
saying that you can grab the cage and do soccer kicks to a down opponent.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree.
There's no referee in nature. There's no referee in conflict.
Yeah, to follow up on that
The laws only apply in agons, and agons are friendly conflicts.
Yes, like in MMA, there is a predestined rule set that says you can't bite them, you can't scratch them, you can't kick below the waist, you can't do anything. And in nature, which again, let me just allude back to this thing that I'm going to harp on probably several times, so I apologize, but survival is the highest goal. Survival is the highest goal for a people, for a group, for a race, for basically anything in nature. Survival.
So you're saying you're not going to be able to morally pontificate when your back's against the wall and you're about to get murdered?
I'm also not going to morally pontificate in a ring, an octagon. Like if I go into an MMA ring, I'm going to be like, nope, I'm setting my own rules. I'm biting that. I'm biting. I'm scratching. I'm punching. I'm going to win.
And in the situation that we're talking about right now, there is no referee. There is only win or lose. It is a pass-fail test. And so when your opponent is jabbing you in the eyes to blind you, you don't get to turn around and say that is objectively immoral and I will not accept that, because then they kick you in the groin. And so you got to fight dirty. And that is what subjective morality teaches people. Objective moral thought process will always lead to a loss when you're engaged in a non-friendly combat situation, a non-friendly fight.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think that's one of the biggest issues with whites in general is the need to morally pontificate. And I think that's why we're in the fucking position we're in the first place, is we want to morally pontificate.
Can I bring up that recent thing that we saw or no?
Hold up, Chris. Hold up. I want to point out, top off of what Will's saying. I think what happened to whites is over the course of 800 years of fucking, well, I guess the feudal system wasn't literally 800 years, but the Christian moral system and serfdom and feudalism, basically whites to a large extent have been transformed into slave-minded thinkers. Like, I know this is painful to talk about. I know some people are going to fucking hate on me, but we all, like, all of us right-wingers or whatever we want to call ourselves, we sit around wondering, well, how did the Swedes go from Vikings to total fucking cucks? Gee, it just doesn't make sense. Well, they ended up with they went from basically like a tribal hunter-gatherer society to a feudal system where you had people at the top and then a big army of serfs below them. And to a large extent, people today are still thinking and acting like those serfs of yonder. So it shouldn't be such a big surprise. They adopted a slave morality system, and this is why they're all bending the knee. This is why they're all cucking. This is why they all think that they can solve their problems by appealing to fairness and rightness and some sort of abstract moral code. And they just get completely steamrolled and crushed because that's a non-competitive thing.
It was the easiest thing after World War II for certain tribesmen to look at the West and be like, well, you have a moral obligation to now support us because of these sins that you've committed in your pursuit of survival. And as a subject, or as a natural moralist, you would look at that and be like, well, no, I'm not going to apologize for that. They were pursuing survival for their own cause, and for their own group, and for their own entity, and for their extended group, and their families, and themselves. Like, that was moral. Like, that's natural morality.
To get back onto the moral pontification point is, like, I even see so many civnats and fucking Christian conservatives who see what's happening in the country right now, all the burning and rioting and looting, and it's like their aggression or their go-to is to kind of quote some Bible verse about coming together and togetherness and egal. It's like, this is what we're talking about when we say liberalism stems.
We're all just part of a herd, and we should be non-threatening.
Exactly.
To each other.
Liberalism stems from fucking Christian moral structure.
Obviously, as sheep, you need a shepherd. But wolves, no. The strongest leads them.
Yeah. So okay. So there's something interesting here. Okay. So let me jump to 750. I jotted that down as where Keith talks about right wingers starting out at a certain place and then basically embracing Nietzschean thought and then giving up on moral rightness. And what I want us all to do is to just give the fuck up on moral rightness and accept that. Well, we'll talk about it after. Here we go.
No group is good or evil. No system is good or evil, and I don't
The
actually.
volume's a bit low.
I don't blame the people in power for exploiting us. because
Okay.
if we
So
were,
let me go back a little further.
a few months later.
Can you guys hear this?
Anyway,
Yeah, just crank it up.
Okay, that's as loud as it goes.
Certain groups are basically behaving in evil ways, and they get very motivated to stop them.
Okay, sorry. So he's saying that when you get pulled into the right, you realize that certain groups are behaving in evil ways, and you want to stop them. So now he says,
And
now he's
then you encounter them a few months later, and they're affirming Nietzscheans, and they're saying, well, actually,
so then right wingers they get into the right wing literature and they start becoming Nietzschean, and they say
affirming Nietzscheanism, and actually they're saying, well, actually, no group is good or evil. No system is good or evil, and I don't blame the people in power for exploiting us, because if we were in power, we would exploit them, and it's all power relations. And so they sacrifice the moral argument and say, well, my argument is my tribe, and basically my morality is that I want my people to flourish. And that becomes kind of tricky in itself, because when they've sacrificed a sense of morality or any absolute truths, the only way to justify collectivism is for an affirmation of.
Can I stop? Can you stop real quick?
Yeah,
I want to comment. So I wrote this down in my notes as brings up power relations, and they're not being good and evil as a dichotomy in Nietzschean perspectives. And then he brings up that topic of wanting your people to survive. I mean, what about it? What about that? That is the highest goal in nature. Is again, like I said, I would bring this up several times. Is survival. Like that is what you're supposed to
It's almost
do.
like it's almost
For
like if you
anything
think
else to 1 second. For anything else to say that you're not designated as your initial goal to survive as a group or a race or a people or a tribe, for anyone to say that that's a bad thing or against objective morality is garbage. It is the most retarded thing I've ever heard in regards to the survival of a people, like anywhere, really.
Well, it's almost like if he believes that like whites take this moral objectivist viewpoint that non-whites are going to be more inclined to let us survive and stop fucking replacing us in our own nations. Like, I don't understand his line of thought there. Like, he thinks that there's going to be some sort of universal truth that allows or inclines non-whites to, sort of take it easy on us. Like, it makes no sense to me.
Okay, here's what he's getting at through the course of the video. He is basically saying that the problem is that our elites are doing this to us. That basically he's making this type of claim where
Well,
it's like,
I have the exact.
hold up. He's
Yeah.
making the point that ultimately, like, we need to have the moral argument so that we can then go face the establishment or face the powers that be, and basically argue our way into fair treatment. And I've got a few different points in the video where he makes points like that, and it's absolutely fucking absurd.
I have the summary if you'd like. I have the summary.
Okay.
So he says, and I quote, modernism was inspired by Nietzsche. Disgust for the bourgeois Christianity, morality, and mentality was internalized by the Western elites. Modern art and postmodernism came from this. Elites feel separated from the mass. They have contempt for them. And he's alluding to, again, modern Nietzscheanism and these elites having that mentality. And then he says, basically compares Nietzsche thought to the modernity, to postmodernism, to art critics, to movie critics, etc. And I'm just sitting here like, this is impossible logic. This is an impossibility. Go ahead.
Right. Like the first point, like the first section, I didn't hear the complete part. Like I don't know if he continued continued on or had where he discusses sort of different moralisms between groups, or like, kind of where if you take the Nietzschean perspective, then it becomes sort of this power struggle between groups. And you kind of lose, in his words, the argument. How is that not reality? I don't understand like how you can advocate for ethnic differences and racial differences,
It's
but at the
total
same
reality.
time, create that type of argument, right? Like nation states are in competition with one another because they have differing interests, like, and that you could say is a affirmation of what we're saying here, is that it is a power struggle between differing groups, and each group is competing with each other for sort of the dominance of their group in whatever realm you want to look at: economics, and militarism, whatever, geography. I mean, that to me is a valid perspective. And I don't understand, like
Alex, real quick, wouldn't you say that a big part of the reason that whites are losing in this race war in America is because they're trying to make that appeal to morality, whereas the other groups are just the ones that are pursuing their own self-interest? This is like the problem we all identified back in 2015, and it seems like Keith has just turned backwards here, and he's like trying to figure this out. And we've all been already kind of moved past this like years ago.
Right. Yes. And like the problem is that our elites, which I don't consider them elites, these people aren't natural elites. I mean,
lesser men.
Yeah, they are democratically elected. They are not individuals who exceed through, you could say, through obstacles. Merit, essentially, yes. And they are using sort of this moral structure. They are the only ones who are proposing this stuff. Whenever you look at like Black Lives Matter or some of these other, they're basically ethnocentric organizations. They are advocating specifically for their own interests, using the dialogue that has been developed by Europeans against themselves.
Yes.
And that is the problem. And like that, it is the slave morality essentially, but we are doing this to ourselves. We are inflicting this on ourselves, and unfortunately, the people who are in charge have the backing of sort of these minority groups who don't care about all this nonsense. They are using it for their own interests, to further and to perpetuate, to gain power, essentially.
Alex, isn't this why we cringe so much when we see like conservatives go like, we need to restore law and order and like unity and bring the country back together and this shit.
And also like, black unemployment.
Hold up. It's so ridiculous because they are stuck trying to make this absolute moral appeal against people who are operating in the world of collective self-interest, right? Should it be so surprising to us that the enemies that want us dead, that want us eradicated, are always pushing our buttons to get stuck in this world of trying to fight against the moral law or appealing to the good of all, and then they go to other racial groups and they say you need to pursue your own self-interest no matter what the cost. That's your moral system. So the people that want us dead are the people that are hurting us into thinking like this, to getting stuck in the world of moral law and moral code and deontological ethics and this and that. So Keith trying to say that, well, we're never going to win if we don't have a system of absolute truth and objective morality. It's exactly why we're losing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I totally agree with that. Like, it's the perspective of those who have had limited survival potential over the last few decades in favor of a positive survival outcome for groups that aren't their own, by necessity, because of the morality, because of this objective morality, because people say this is what you should do because this is your sins, this is what you've done, and this is how you can remedy it, this is how you can take care of it, this is what reparations are, this is what third world aid is, this is what basically charity of other groups stems from.
Well, another aside that I kind of wanted to make too is, I mean, it seems that a lot of these people in this new alt-right are trying to push this kind of moral objectivist cultural Christian worldview on our guys, and that's, this is something that all of us are kind of horrified about, because it pushes them towards that kind of Amnat Groyper worldview, and that's exactly what we're trying to get our guys away from, is that type of shit. So, I mean,
That's right.
what do you
And I
guys
think
think
maybe
about that?
Keith has been hanging with E. Michael Jones too much or something like that, because it seems like what he's trying to get at is I don't think Keith is like a real Christian or a real Catholic. So I'm guessing he's like thinking, oh, we got to return to the Logos or something along these lines, where he's trying to think of like some idealistic system that makes us all right. And I'm going to cut to the meat of it. The thing that is like so fucking ridiculous to me about this is that ultimately he tries to kind of make the claim. I don't have a timestamp for this one, so you'll just have to take this my word on this. He tries to make this claim that ultimately what we're failing at is critiquing modernity. That basically, like, our damn movement just isn't intellectual enough. That we really need harder hitting critiques of modernity. And man, I've got to say, I think exactly the opposite. I think critiquing the modern system, critiquing modernity is the one thing that we're doing well. We've kind of got the intellectual side of it covered. We are combating the system on intellectual grounds. We've got both the empirical and the rationalist. We've got the principles and we've got the data on our side. So just trying to win on like the intellectual or the truth perspective, it doesn't really fucking matter, right? Like we've done it. We've critiqued modernity. We've critiqued the elites. We've called them out in our own way. But ultimately, what we're lacking is the ability to collectivize and take power. So when Keith is trying to say, well, like we need a better framework by which to critique modernity, it's like, well, fuck, dude. How is that going to make us win? It's like if you erect this glass temple of philosophy that's absolutely perfect and absolutely critiques modernity perfectly, is that really going to just suddenly, world-changing events are going to happen and we're going to end up in power again?
Reminds me of the same trap that the proprietarians fell into, to be honest.
Yes. And Keith was actually correctly critiquing them, right? He did a video on the proprietarianism thing and said like, oh yeah, this is appealing to, kind of autistic INTJ guys. And it's all these mental constructs that don't really mean anything in reality. And you could sort of like go down this rabbit hole of thinking in this legalistic way forever, but ultimately it's not going to change anything on the ground. Like, that's what I want to say to him is you trying to come up with the perfect philosophic answer for why modernity is wrong is not going to put our group in power again.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to touch on is something he said a little bit later in the video. He said Nietzscheans won't engage seriously in philosophy because discussion of metaphysics is off the table. They presuppose materialism. They won't take seriously the concept of idealism, the consciousness of the mind coming before matter. But isn't that basically what
he's presupposing Nietzscheans are all materialists?
Yeah, but isn't Nietzsche basically saying, yes, it is your conscience, it is the divine right of you to overcome certain obstacles, certain physical things, and become an overman or a superman or something above what everyone else is just stuck in all the time.
He's presupposing that all Nietzscheans, especially in our sphere, are materialists, which is actually wrong. And it's funny because Kayla actually makes a good point, Chat. She says this is something that happens with smart people a lot of the time. The constant loop of deconstruction, reconstruction, which gets back to what I was saying about moral pontification, which with a lot of these guys do a lot of the time. So.
Yeah, Keith could spend his entire life trying to search for the answer of the perfect philosophy to oppose modernity, and ultimately, is like that going to get us anything? Or are we gonna get a tangible win out of that? I really doubt it. I think that you can go too far with intellectualizing. That like maybe he is maybe he's a really high IQ dude, and he could literally spend his whole life in this loop of trying to solve these things.
Not only that, but does morality or some sense of objective moralism, is that going to bring you victory in the end? Because I mean, if you believe that the Germans were morally righteous in the last World War, they lost.
No,
So
that's
where
one thing. That's one thing I wanted to bring up. He didn't bring up victory. He didn't bring up conquest. He didn't bring up survival. He brought up the idea of idealism, which is it's almost an irrational feat. It's almost like if everything was exactly as I wanted, things would the outcomes would be exactly as I foresee them.
It's like I have to make this whole thing work perfectly in my head. I have to achieve perfection in my own head of all my logical constructs, and then I'm going to finally be satisfied. And it's like, okay, well, what does that get the rest of us? This isn't going to get us our country back. I'm sorry. So
Idealism is not going to get the country back. You're
Exactly.
not even the fucking country. How about the sovereignty of our race? That's literally all that matters at this point. I mean, borders can be defined, but if the sovereignty of the race is non-existent, then borders mean fucking fuck all at that point.
You know, it's funny, and this is a bit of a fuck you to Christians. I'm sorry. It's not at Christians. It's just at Christianity itself. If you want to do the work, you're not going to pray. You're not going to idealize. You're going to do the work yourself. That's where the mentality of nature comes into extant view. It's when you're strong, you have more ability to enact your power than if you are a weak little person who is just espousing ivory power.
But I followed all the rules. I've done everything just right. This is unfair. It doesn't make a fucking difference.
Exactly. Yeah. That's my point. Like, again, in nature, and that's one thing pagans, I think, get kind of right. I might be biased. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm kind of biased towards paganism because I'm pagan. We know that nature is supreme, and we also know that it's undefeatable. You could be a man against time. You can fight against nature, and that makes you a stronger person. It makes you a person that's basically a hero.
Heroic.
Yeah. But in the end, nature wins, and then it recycles. To fight against that, sure, but just to say that that's the bad route, I'm sorry, but I would not follow Keith Woods into a battle of any physical, situation or circumstance.
Are you like saying that that you're throughout his whole argument because you would say like, bro, those are all interesting points, but do you even lift?
Okay, so this is the only personal attack I'm going to do on Keith Woods. I could arm wrestle him into oblivion within 10 seconds. I guarantee that.
But what about a brain wrestle?
But he could probably out climb you though. So
no one can outclimb me. I know we already know this. This is a meme. Okay, this is a meme.
Okay, let me keep it moving. At 1355, he says it all comes down, like into the Nietzschean, it all comes down to aesthetics because you've given up the moral claim, and then you have to start arguing in the realm of aesthetics. And man, I couldn't agree more with that. To me, that absolutely resonates. And in my own circles, this is something I've been really trying to get across to people, and it's been a little bit difficult, but I've been like just staunchly trying to make this point to people that forget trying to say like, oh, we've got the facts and we're morally right. Just accept that the other groups have their own vision, have their vision of the future, of their utopian future that they want to create, and we have ours. And we have to fight, and we have to determine who's going to be stronger, and whoever ends up winning this conflict for, world supremacy, basically. It's not looking too great for us right now, but hey, it could turn around any minute. Basically gets to enact their vision of what the world could be and make that real. So we've got this vision of like fucking space Aryan Vikings colonizing planets, whatever. And their vision is something else, like a transhuman, non-racial AI run utopia or something like that.
Shit.
Yeah, exactly. And we find that disgusting, right? To us, their utopia is our dystopia and vice versa. So ultimately, like this is where the argument is really made, is in the realm of aesthetics, right? Like what is it that I want? What is it that I want the world to become? And how do I see myself in that world? And Keith goes on, and this is around the 14-minute mark or so, I think. But he starts going like, oh yeah, you can have these ideas about you know, like returning to masculinity and being more manly and getting out in the woods and, you know, conquering Mars or whatever. But, you know, that doesn't make you morally right. And I'm thinking, yes, it fucking does, because my moralization doesn't come from a, you know, long deductive argument. I'm not writing down this, you know, like a geometry proof to try to justify myself. I'm looking at a vision of what the world could be and how I fit in it, and it's emotionally appealing to me and emotionally appealing to others of my friends, and we decide together that this is something that we want to pursue. That's our fucking argument, not some long Kantian, you know, 700-page tome that, you know, really I don't think is all that impactful.
Yeah,
Which is ironic because the mobs aren't going to give a shit about that either.
Yeah.
I mean, I totally agree with you with what you said, Dagus, because, like, in my opinion, the highest moral attitude you can have is the survival of your group. And in a modern sense, this group is probably the most easily attacked. It's the most easily brought in under the gun or under fire and media, et cetera, et cetera. And, like, you know, my morality stems from the survival of my own family, my own person, my group, my people, more than anything else you can ever invent in an objective morality structure. I'm not going to invite third worlders into my country. I'm not going to give my own, you know, hearth and home to people who are not my own. I'm not going to do any of that. Like, the highest moral sense literally equates to survival in nature itself. So any proposed difference, sorry for stuttering, would be counterintuitive to my own survival. It would be counterintuitive to my group's survival. It would be counterintuitive to my people's survival. And he lives in Ireland, and I have a soft spot for the Irish. I really do. But he's basically saying Christianity totally did wonders for my nation, or this objective morality structure obviously did wonders for my nation. And then I look at modern Ireland, and I'm like, you're being wiped off the face of your small, green, perfect little plot on earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, while they're trying to come up with some sort of objective moralism or moral objectivism rather, you know, they're getting ethnically replaced faster than you know, most other countries are. So
when you said what you said earlier with regards to aesthetics, I didn't catch completely what you had said. Was he kind of making an argument that sort of Nietzscheans appeal to sort of an anti-rationalist type of, like?
Yes, exactly. That Nietzscheans are ultimately stuck. He said he thinks that this is a negative, that they ultimately have to sort of justify their worldviews through like poetic or visual mediums, right? That essentially that their way of argumentation is through aesthetics or art, or which could be a lot of different things. That could be, you know, certain, you know, like German Romanticism,
Just aesthetic.
literature, plays. It could be in the way a man carries himself. He says, you know, embracing masculinity is sort of an aesthetic. So in a way, it's aesthetics is really all about what you see as a, you know, a beautiful world or a better world. And to me, that's much more impactful than a legalistic moral argument that's written down on paper.
Right. It kind of like I'm sure people have seen this meme where, like, sort of you have the difference, or so this meme contrasting left-wing sort of arguments versus right-wing arguments, where the right-wing argument is very it's very limited, and sort of it's what the messaging is sort of implied, or, you know, it does not have to be a long paragraph, or like it does not have to be completely written out. I don't know if I described that.
No, I think what you're saying is that, like, I would say that the basic bitch conservatives get stuck in this world of trying to, you know, like literally justify every one of their positions rationally. Well, if we cut off welfare, those people would actually get richer. They'd make more money because, you know what I mean? Like, they try to justify each of their positions by arguing how it would help each individual or help the society at large. And they can never just bite the bullet and say, you know what? I think it's okay if the society bottoms out a little bit, if some of the if some of the dead weight on society sort of gets cut loose. I'm okay with that, because you know what, I have a vision of a world where we're stronger, we're more self-reliant, this and that. Instead, they get stuck in this game of trying to rationally justify every single thing that they want according to a moral framework that they're not in control of. This is why the conservatives
All right,
lose.
Dagus,
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of connect on to what you were just saying right now, what you guys were talking about, and read this quote that, I mean, it touches exactly to, in my opinion, an appeal to aesthetics. And you guys can correct me if you interpret this differently. But this is actually a quote from Thomas Carlyle that says, quote, "All things that we see standing accomplished in the world are properly the outer material result, the practical realization and embodiment of thoughts that dwelt in the great men sent into the world. The soul of the whole world's history, it may justly be considered, were the history of these," unquote. I don't know. To me, that sounds like an appeal to aesthetics to a degree. What would you guys say?
Well, one thing there is he's kind of espousing some new thought philosophy that essentially, like, the internal becomes the external, that you're
Yes,
sort of
exactly.
the world that you envision. But how does that relate? So okay, Alex was talking about kind of left versus right, how they like. I think Alex, to finish my take on your point, was you were kind of saying that like left wingers appeal to aesthetics a little bit more. Were you making a point?
No, it'd be the opposite. I believe that right wingers kind of appeal to symbolisms and aesthetics, and to like sort of what we can see as sort of irrationalism in a way, but that's not a bad thing. That's not something that is. I mean, that's that's something that just is.
It's funny if we're talking about aesthetics. I run a channel, like I posted over 3,000 pieces of art and aesthetics.
This is Grizzly's plug for his art
This is my
channel.
plug, by the way. It's called Art and Beauty, European Art. It's on Telegram.
T.me/European Art Beauty, right?
Yeah, it's really great. It's something I curate pretty
Okay, so
regularly.
everybody go subscribe to European art. How do you say it in the Cheems way?
European Armed or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually the real.
That's
the real one.
Grizzly takes these Cheems memes and then he
I find the real art, the quote unquote real art, and I just post that.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, like it's funny. Like even in classical or archaic renditions of beauty and perfection, aesthetics is purity. It's power. It's strength. It's physique. It's the qualities that the left hate with a passion that will never die. It's like the most beautiful. It's the most observably, like, so one of my takes, obviously, which everyone should agree with. If you don't, you're gay. Beauty is objective. Objective.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to disagree with both you guys on this. I think that the left has its own aesthetics and that they push their aesthetics 24/7 on us. I mean, you guys have to, every time you go into a department store, you are affronted by hundreds of blown up airbrush pictures of like mixed race people.
And by the way, I did a study on this about 5 years ago on are advertising agencies losing money for their own clients? And the answer is simply yes, they are, with their fat people and their black people and their chubby chase, hideous people.
Undesirables.
They are losing money on this. And as soon as you post something beautiful, like Dior did just recently, I just saw on my Twitter feed, Dior, which is also degenerate, posted like a purely European ad. It was just mythology. It was filled with nymphs and dryads and Hylas and a bunch of myths from European history. And that thing had garnered more views by itself than anything they've recently posted in the last 10 years.
Okay, but to respond to Alex, though, I think that what I see is that the left hits both the rational and the aesthetic, and the, like, they're hitting the mind, body, and the spirit when in their campaign to sort of shape the modern world. They have their own aesthetics, they have their own rational arguments, and then they have their own people on the ground sort of enforcing it and making what they believe into law. They've kind of covered all of their bases, I would say, and the right is kind of discombobulated and a little bit disjointed on its messaging, where the left is like monolithic and consistent.
I think that, well, the left, I've always seen sort of aesthetics and art from the left as being very bland and very sort of appealing, essentially naturally. Like it's in some ways it can be revolting, like, but you have to sit there and make some type of logical argument in favor of it. You have to sit, like, it's something that at first glance would sort of, be revolting to most people, but then, like, I can imagine some university student stopping and having to somehow rationalize what they just saw into some logical formulation, sort of a way in which that kind of makes it to them seem positive.
Don't you see that, Alex, that's part of how their hierarchy works, that the people that are able to make those mental leaps and bounds are considered intellectually superior to the rabble like us who go, that's fucking gross. Why would you throw poo at a canvas and call that art, right?
And I will say this, like in modernity, like modern art, like MoMA, for instance, is like a great example of an art structure that is, you can go there as any of us can do. Like I've been there in New York City, which already, and you walk into MoMA and you're like, I'm walking into an IKEA, something that doesn't represent beauty in any form. I mean, there's hand sprayed white, sprayed boards full of trash nailed to a board, and this was, won an art award, or just a pure black piece that said midnight, and this won an award. And you look at art from the 1820s or 1830s or into the early 1920s or 19th century or the early 20th century, and you look at that and you're like, I've never seen something that looks so real created by a human, or I've never seen something so beautiful.
Be honest with me. Are you posting in your European Art and Beauty channel right now?
While I'm talking, yeah, I'm just posting. But no, I'm saying, like, objectively, this is more attractive, objectively so. And then, when I look at MoMA or look at art critics, they are designed and they are led to believe, and they push this on modernity. And this is why I said, I think Keith Woods is wrong in this facet. Nietzsche would have looked at these art pieces. I look at these art pieces with a Nietzschean perspective, and I'm like, this is like hell. This is like disgusting. This is like vomit inducing. This is like something that limits beauty in the world, and it would never be tolerated in a society that didn't have this preset condition of everyone's equal, everyone should do what they want, everyone's kind of like, it just depends. But no.
Right. And to kind of follow up on just what the whole argument we're talking about here is, I mean, in terms of irrationalism, like, I mean, I think this is a reason why religion has always been associated with the right, is because there's always kind of this sort of irrational component, in my opinion, of religion. Regardless, it requires some element of faith. It requires some element of just a belief without without having to explain it concretely, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
sort
sense
of is another contrast between left and right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get your point. You're basically saying, like, something so naturally occurring to anybody with two eyes and natural senses would be like, this is abhorrent, and that extends obviously beyond just beauty and art. It extends to civilization that we see ourselves in. It extends to a lot of the concepts that even were brought up in Keith's video. And I'm like, I look at this and I'm like, I don't know how you got those ideas. I really don't know. But I got a little bit more feedback from Dagus. He said he used to be a leftist. I can see that coming from a leftist perspective. But anything else, I don't really see.
He attributes this to Nietzsche wrong. Reason that full endless, kind of like connected from the psychological.
I don't know if anyone else is having trouble listening to or hearing Dagus, but Dagus sounds like you're being interrupted every now and then.
Yeah, he was kind of cutting out a little bit for me.
Maybe I. All right, I'll go on mute. You.
Yeah, we can't hear what you're saying.
Anyway, Alex, he's going to reset, I think, and rejoin. But from what I sent you and from what those arguments that Keith had stated, I think we ended off on a certain point, which was about modernity and art and beauty and things like that. What would your take be on that?
I would have to find that. Yeah, to be honest, I have not been able to go through this thoroughly. I mean, not saying that I have not like thought about these ideas, but yeah, give me one second.
I actually think we might be getting a special guest here soon. So,
Hey guys, is it better now?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
sound better. And also, is that special
Much better.
guest Keith Woods? Because that would be awesome.
yeah, he DM'd me and said he was sick of listening to Dagus's immoral pontification, so he wanted to come on and debate him. But
All right. Well, I think some good points were made. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was that he says that we need populism, that this sort of Nietzschean thought destroys populism. And I guess my question then is like, do we really want populism?
Well, I wouldn't even presuppose that question. I would say populism has no inherent want of Nietzschean's perspective. Nietzsche talked about the unharmonious nature of man. He talked about a lack of universalism. He talked about a lack of equality, and that's one of the most interesting things when I was looking through Keith's video. Is like I don't know if he has read a lot of Nietzsche. And I'm not like a super fanboy. I do like Nietzsche. I do agree with his principles, but I looked at what he said and I was like, what you're saying doesn't make sense. But like nothing about what he said has any qualities about equality or liberalism or it's a will to power. Like that's one of his books.
what
Was
Chris
the
is
will to
basically
power.
saying is he's got different photos of Nietzsche in his spank bank. So
I didn't say that. I'm not gay. Let me call those.
But you're saying Keith Woods is making an argument against Nietzscheanism because it's not populist enough, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's sort of this elitist aristocratic thinking that Nietzsche pushes is anti-populist. That Nietzsche essentially despises the masses. So therefore, how can we build a movement around those types of principles?
Well, the NDASP did it, and I think Will has a lot to say about that. But go ahead, Alex.
NSDAP, yeah.
Right, but like
Sorry,
I mean,
NDASP.
do you get your strength purely from a philosopher for political measure or for political?
Yeah, I think that's a flaw in his conceptual worldview. If that's what he's going for, is that you need some sort of philosophical sort of leader like that to kind of spearhead taking political power, which is not really how the world is working in the current age. It's not how it used to be.
It never really has. I don't think that there's ever been one person in history that people could base 100% of their worldview on. You know, there's even Marx, right? It was very people debated how to interpret him. Everybody had their own
Not real
version of it.
communism, bro.
Yeah, exactly. And then later people came along and sort of filled in the blanks and added their own details and their own interpretations of Marx that ended up being more, a little bit more a little bit more fine-tuned for taking power. And it's kind of the same thing like with the Nietzschean stuff. Like we can embrace a lot of his moral principles, but we don't need to, like Keith is making it like an either or. Like either Nietzsche has all the answers, or it's like we've got to just throw it all out because it's.
So are we the real pragmatists?
I don't know. Kat Kayla just joined us, and she was making some good points about Keith kind of going like waffling back between idealism and pragmatism. So Kayla, thanks for hopping on.
Yeah. Hey guys.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
Yep, no worries.
I didn't want to interrupt, so just kind of keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I guess we
I heard
kind of,
Alex's, I think he was about to say something.
Yeah, no, I mean, to follow up on what Dagos was saying, well, like, yes, I mean, you've seen communist societies in the past appeal to what you can consider right-wing ideas, even though that would be heretical to, like, the communist worldview, or just, of Marxism and what it truly believes in and entails. We live in a democratic society. I mean, I think that many people within the dissident right would not consider themselves Democrats, but they have to appeal to the masses in one way or another. So you have to make some type of concessions, and you have to sacrifice some of your core viewpoints, philosophically, in order to gain power, regardless, in the realm of politics.
I definitely agree. What I'll say to that too is that he then follows up and says that dissident movements need a compelling moral narrative. And that might be true, but now we're, like Kayla's been pointing out in the chat, we're oscillating back between idealism and pragmatism. So basically, like, what if I told you guys that you had to lie to the masses to take power? Would that then mean that you have to internalize this lie and believe it? No, not necessarily. So just because taking power requires
means
a
to an end.
moral narrative, yeah, exactly. Just because you have to draft some sort of moral propaganda to be able to establish power doesn't necessarily mean that becomes true, or that you really have to believe in it. So I can sort of make I can sort of make deontological moral claims, like I'm like appealing to a moral law or a moral system in my aspirations to take power, but ultimately behind that I can be practicing collective egoism, as he calls it, which is just tribal collectivism or tribal self-interest.
Yeah, and I guess that's the dichotomy that we're kind of stuck here within these spheres, is this moral objectivism versus moral relativism, and which means is the best route to take to put our people in a better position.
Yeah, and I would just go in line with what Nietzsche, again, albeit kind of reductionary approach to Nietzsche's logic, but will to power makes sense. Nature makes sense when you're talking about man. He is a part of nature, and he himself is nature. He is the embodiment of nature and the end all be all of nature. And there's a quote, I believe, from Thus Spoke Zarathustra that I wanted to read. What is great about man is that he is a bridge, not an end. What can be loved about man is that he is going over and a going under. I love those who do not know how to live except as downgoers, for they are going over. I love all those who are likely like heavy raindrops falling individually from the dark cloud that hang over man. They herald the coming of the lightning and perish as heralds. Anyway, so basically, Nietzschean's concepts are purely natural. Anything else, if you advocate for anything else other than Nietzscheanism, you are against nature and you're going to lose. So there's that. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, Kayla, what would you say? What's your kind of perspective on moral objectivism and how pragmatic that is for modern pro-white movements?
Hey, Will, Kayla, drop for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I was basically asking her what her perspective was on moral objectivism and how pragmatic she maybe feels that is or isn't for modern kind of pro-white spheres.
I mean, I think it's something to where, and this was mentioned earlier, that a lot of people kind of enter, and Keith was mentioning this, right? A lot of people enter the movement, right, with this idea that they're being wronged morally. And I get it, right? Because you're entering from like an idealistic standpoint. And then eventually, right, like to achieve your goals, it's going to shift. It's going to become a little more realistic in the way that you'll approach something. And this idea that everyone will be able to agree. I mean, if we were talking about Molyneux's like universally preferable behavior, what would everyone's response be? Right? Because this is the same idea that's being put forth.
Solid
Yeah,
take.
basically, yeah, that's very well said. In fact, I feel like I said something like that myself a few days ago, but
Oh,
very,
no.
very good. Yeah, so basically, like what Keith wants is he wants something like
Kayla said it first.
what Immanuel Kant tried to do a few hundred years ago, which was make a claim that morality is always going to follow some sort of moral law, that there's going to be some sort of objective standard that's going to apply to every action, right? And this Kant called this his categorical imperative. And I think that this is ultimately like what Keith's mind sort of craves is he wants some sort of moral maxims that are always true in every situation, regardless of the context or the individual, right? And
I think a lot
I
of the
am
reason a lot of people tend to drift towards trying to find some sort of moral objectivism is because it's almost like the reality that's setting in of the situation is not appealing to a lot of people. It's ugly. It's like, the truth is ugly. The reality of the situation
Yeah.
that we're in is not a pretty thing. And, you have to realize that there might not be a pretty solution out of this mess. And, not to Fed post or anything, but that's kind of what I get from people who try to philosophize too much about trying to find some sort of moral objectivist viewpoint and a shared worldview that they can kind of apply to their standards.
Yeah, and I actually totally agree with what Daga said there. Like there's a belief that idealism is a thing, and yes, idealism is a thing, but it pre-concludes that nature doesn't have a say in it, that natural elements, that power itself doesn't have a say in it, that the overman doesn't have a say in it, that many other aspects of nature, that exist above nature, which is kind of like where a lot of like scientists or creators or artists came out of mentally. I guess I would say is there's this idea that everyone's kind of like on the same page, that we're all I have to do is espouse my own beliefs, and then obviously idealism should take hold, and that's not going to happen. Idealism's not going to happen. Pragmatism doesn't revolve around idealism. It kind of tries to add idealism into it, I guess I would say.
So I guess, Dags, what would your sort of remedy be to this sort of Kantian moralism? Like, would you kind of emphasize Nietzsche's philosophy, or is there a little more of like a modern twist that you might put on it?
I'm so glad you asked that. I've been thinking about that for a long time now, actually a few years. And one of the things what I used to suggest is I used to break it down this way. Like the Kantian system was deontological ethics, meaning you're following a moral code. It's like the 10 Commandments are your code, and every action that you do has to fit within that moral code.
Very Abrahamic.
Exactly, right? And that's slave morality, right? That's basically follow the law, or you're a baddie, you're a predator.
And just to bring that into modernity, also, that's like the idea.
Hold on.
You destroy something, and the insurance company is going to take over. There you go.
I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
That's Kantian ethics. It's like someone else will take care of it.
Oh, okay. You're not taking responsibility for your own actions. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I totally get it now. Okay, and then your other alternative, the way that it got kind of pitched in the history of philosophy was the opposite of that was consequential ethics, and this was like utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill's, the ends justify the means. So it doesn't matter what actions you take, so long as they get the result that you want. And kind of the argument against that is that you can sort of fall into a slippery slope of turning evil very, very easily, or you can do all sorts of atrocious things by
From the moral objective
justifying
as
the
well,
ends.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So then, yeah, very good. And then what I take to be the third position of those two would be virtue ethics. And I've always kind of leaned towards virtue ethics. And typically when we're talking virtue ethics, it's Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics was the book from a couple thousand years ago that sort of everybody follows or everybody references when they talk about virtue ethics. But I sort of more think of virtue ethics in like, typically like the Norse context. Most of us are Northern European background around here, so that stuff is kind of appealing, even if it's kind of modern. You know what I'm
What are you
talking about?
talking about, guy? I guess I'm Southern Sicilian gang.
You guys know what I'm talking about, like the 9 noble virtues or whatever. Like they're kind of
Yeah, I'm
modern
just
and
messing.
kind of made up, but it's still good shit. It's still basically like a warrior code type of stuff.
They're also based off of like if anyone's into paganism, they're based off of the Eddas, they're based off the Havamal, they're based off the sagas. They have a basis in historical accuracy or how even enemies of our people perceived us in the past. So it's not just out of the blue.
So what I would definitely like lean towards virtue ethics. I've always thought that made the most sense, that ultimately like what you're trying to do is you're trying to become the best version of you. You're trying to become more brave. You're trying to become more resilient. You're trying to become this. You're trying to become that. So there are all these different like categories that you're trying to improve yourself in. That's kind of how I see virtue ethics. But perhaps maybe it's not one of these three. Maybe the moral system that we embrace should have a little bit of all three. Maybe to keep the order among the group, there should be a little bit of a moral code. Maybe we should be
talked about in length too, sort of an esoteric and exoteric moral doctrine.
Absolutely. So I think your exoteric moral doctrine can be like a law-based ethic, a deontological ethic, where you tell people, hey, if you're going to be part of our group, you've got to follow this code. What is the expression, honor among thieves? That even that sort of in group where they're extremely cutthroats or whatever, even they have their own moral code that they have to follow among themselves. So sort of a moral code for the in group to follow. Then a greater purpose by which you're willing to, which has a supremacy over the moral code. So ultimately, the moral code has to stand aside if it's getting in the way of your greater purpose. And then individuals work towards virtue ethics. They try to, become the best version of themselves. They try to improve in whatever in all the values that your group deems important, whether that's courage or honor or whatever the hell else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Self-control. I don't know. So I guess what I'm trying to say now is I used to get stuck in this philosophical thing of like, is it left or is it right? Is it deontological or is it consequential? And then I found the third position of virtue ethics, and I was kind of with that for a while. But now I'm kind of thinking, why not just take a 3-pronged approach? Why not use all 3 moral tools or ethical tools that are at our disposal and use them all in different ways wherever we're appropriate?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something, like I said, that we've all discussed at length, like multiple times, even before this Keith Woods video popped off. We've discussed the need for sort of an esoteric and exoteric moral structure by way of which, the way we operate within our own circles and spheres within our own people. We do have this sort of virtue ethics and moral code with each other as a racial group. But outside of our own racial group and tribe per se, it's a little more will to power and, moral relativist, if you want to say that. So, I'd have to agree with that.
Yeah, well, I will say this to any Christians listening, and I'm not shitting on you as a group. I just want to acknowledge that aspect of survival is not really part and parcel to their spiritual worldview. It's kind of a universalitarian approach, which means everyone survives. It doesn't matter what specific group doesn't survive, just as everyone survives. And one thing I just wanted to quote from the video real quick, which is the last little bit. Basically, he said, Nietzscheans won't engage seriously in philosophy because discussion of metaphysics is off the table. They presuppose materialism. They won't take seriously the concept of idealism, the consciousness of the mind coming before matter, matter existing contingently on our souls. I just have to say, there is no semblance in Christianity of their consciousness coming before matter. It does not exist. There is.
Yeah, that annoyed me, that section of the video, because it was completely wrong in his analysis to assert that Nietzscheans don't have any metaphysics, which tells me he's not very well versed with paganism or ethnic European spirituality.
Or maybe just pre-conclude, just as he stated himself, as we would pre-conclude that materialism is the ne plus ultra. There's my word. I used it once. I'm not going to use it again. Of spirituality.
Just kidding.
But it's not. Like, literally no form of my spirituality revolves around a materialistic aspect, except by a recognition that nature is the predominant component of my spirituality.
So there's something else that came out around that same part of the video where he starts talking. He claims that the will to power is like an incoherent concept. Let me pull that up. Oh, yeah, it's around 2250. He claims that the will to power is not a coherent concept, and that if it is a coherent concept, it's just sort of like an affirmation of materialism. And that kind of ties into that idea that if you're Nietzschean, and by Nietzschean I sort of mean you accept this master-slave construct, right? That this is sort of the idea that you buy into. That's kind of what I would say is the number one thing for being a Nietzschean. So if you're Nietzschean, suddenly you deny all metaphysics, or you deny all anything that goes beyond this life. And I think that what he's trying to tap into is that idea of the eternal recurrence. Maybe I'm giving Keith too much credit here. I'm not sure, but in the eternal recurrence, Nietzsche basically puts it out there that, like, imagine that you have to live this life over and over and over and over into infinity. That your life is just going to be on Groundhog's Day till the end of time, and then beyond. Would you live life the way that you're living it today? Would you still pursue things? Would you still kind of go about things the same way if you knew that the choices that you make now would have to be relived a billion times over? And kind of what he's trying to do there is he's trying to get you to sort of tap into your moral strength a little bit, and to start saying, like, no, I need to pursue a greater destiny than the life that I'm living right now. So sort of the way that I interpret it is, when he's giving us this model of the eternal return, it's to sort of put some anxiety or light a fire underneath us to try to get us to pursue more heroic ends. You might say that you need a more aesthetic vision of your life, that you need some sort of beautiful purpose for all of it, that you need some sort of heroic aim to it. But I guess maybe Keith could take that and interpret it, and he goes, well, if this life is just repeating over and over and again, then all this life, then there's nothing beyond this life. Therefore, you might as well just embrace hedonism and live for your own pleasure. I think that's sort of perhaps the takeaway that Keith Woods would have gotten out of based on a lot of what he's saying in here.
Yeah, the YOLO trajectory makes no sense to me. I mean, in paganism, we do have the eternal recurrence, and it's not just I'm going to live this exactly as I was or as my ancestors lived it. It's a mastery of it, and this is one thing that if you read Nietzsche, you would understand that's the end all be all is not just the contemporary. It's not just the idea of like living out the same thing over and over again. It's becoming more and more of a god. And to me, in paganism, and this might get a little bit more esoteric than most are comfortable with, but we inherently are descendants of gods, and we have the pursuit, the ability to become our ancestors, or to invoke their energy, or to invoke what they have done for us in the past. I believe that's far from the YOLO spirit. That's far from the you only live once, do whatever you want, the hedonistic mindset. I believe that's more empowering than saying I'm going to die, I'm going to go to heaven or hell. That's more empowering than saying I'm going to live once. That's more empowering than anything else you can do on this earth.
It's a differentiation between linear and cyclical time, which is one of the main fundamental differences between a Christian and more naturalist pagan worldview.
Well, and I can understand that if Keith is worried about kind of this like recurring life, triggering a hedonistic way that people will kind of go about it. Like that's why he would start to talk about Schopenhauer, right? Like, but at the same time, it was something that was, sorry. I'm like totally.
No, you're on point, Kayla. So that's the point that he goes into next. So he says that the will to power is incoherent, and that real traditionalists don't base anything on like materialism or whatever.
Right,
and he says they base it on
your
freedom,
desires, like anything.
Yes.
Leading to that.
So he says that traditionalists are after freedom ultimately, and what he means by freedom is like a Buddhist type of detachment.
Yeah.
So essentially denial of the will to power. So if you guys know the history,
ego.
Exactly, ego denial is ultimately at the core of religion, and this is actually something that Evola sometimes kind of tapped into a little bit, which made me kind of not like Evola in some ways. That's maybe another topic for another day, but this idea that ego denial is the essence of religion, and Keith actually gets into this, and he says, well, Nietzsche thought that Eastern religions were all about ego denial and ego death, and he totally misunderstands them, because all those religions are actually about integrating the ego in a peaceful, in a better way or something, or in a better way. But ultimately, I have to disagree. I've read, in college, I did go through a course where we did read a lot of the early Buddhist discourses, like kind of the original words from the Buddha, or something closer to it than the Buddhism that exists today. And it's quite clear that what Buddhism seeks is denial of the will, denial of the ego, total detachment, spiritual annihilation, destroying your soul to the point where you won't be reincarnated.
I like what you said earlier, and you said it's a death cult, like an ultimate death cult, where you're no longer yourself, you become part of a whole and completely destroy who you are.
But to do that, you have to self-annihilate, right?
Yeah.
And the way that I think they talk about it in Buddhism is like you have to escape the wheel of samsara, meaning like you have to break the cycle of reincarnation and enter into non-existence. So if you know about Nietzsche, he got his idea of the will to power. It came from Schopenhauer, who was famous for being the most obnoxious, pessimistic man in world history, maybe. And Schopenhauer, I think he wrote a book that was titled "The World as Will" or something like that. I'd have to go look it up. I don't know this stuff all that well. I never read this one specifically, but Schopenhauer in that makes an argument that willpower or like living beings trying to fight for their own survival is like the nature of life, and ultimately this is evil. The will, that trying to cling to life itself is like the root of all evil. So when he says the word will, he means like this is the bad stuff. And Schopenhauer then thought all of Western thought, all of Western philosophy was way off base because it was all kind of trapped in this mode of trying to hang on to life or whatever. So then he goes and tries. He's like the first European academic type, maybe, to go and start researching Buddhism, and he brings it back to Germany and starts advocating for Buddhism in Germany because he thinks it's the only way to extinguish the ego, or that they've got a
Yeah, that's
secret
exactly what
to-
Germans need right now.
Yeah, sure. That ultimately, like, ego and will are bad, and you have to like pour water on that fire and squelch it, and basically go into non-existence. And Schopenhauer, if you guys don't know, he was an anti-natalist. He basically thought that everybody should voluntarily become incels and not reproduce, so that the human race would end. That we'd be better off as rocks as opposed to living beings. That like the struggle for life itself is just so cruel and awful
So he's
that we should all
basically the
just go
dodo
into
bird of the
non-existence.
philosophers,
Yeah, I guess so.
meaning he's
So,
content with going extinct, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, totally. So Nietzsche comes along. I think Nietzsche is like 20 years younger than him or so, something like that. And he goes, "Oh my God, Schopenhauer was a genius, except for he got it completely backwards. The will to life is actually the one thing in this universe that's good. All these rocks floating around in space don't really mean anything, but the will to life, the clinging to existence, embracing life, is the one good that we can all get behind." And with that comes with the will to survival, the will to life, comes the will to power, because you can't survive if you don't have any power around your surroundings.
Exactly.
You just
And
use,
and even I'm sorry to interrupt, but even some plebeian tier intellectuals like the father of uh, evolution, Darwin, was like, like these guys all have a common denominator somewhere, which is the will to survive. So if they're confronted with this like a place that they don't know, or the circumstance that is bad, what do? They evolve to overcome that. That's the natural way. It's not to die. It's not to become weak. It's not to become some element where you're out of it. You're just kind of going with the flow and seeing what happens, or it doesn't matter anyways, because we're gonna all
Well, but that's what made Schopenhauer unique in his pessimism. Was that it was pretty much like, we're going to do this, we're going to free ourselves, and then that'll be it, right?
yeah, Schopenhauer took pessimism to its logical conclusion, which is just self annihilation, right?
Yeah,
Or
it reminded me of
annihilation.
who's that guy that gave everyone Kool-Aid?
Well, yeah, Jim Jones, but like no, but
Jim
that's
Jones.
what we would tell people. We would never tell people this, right? But like, if everyone's, I'm so unhappy, this is ridiculous, I hate my life, I hate this, and well, what would the response be after a while, right? Then kill yourself. I mean,
Yeah,
because
if life truly isn't worth living, then
Yeah.
then show it through your actions.
Exactly.
And I've used that advice to people who have asked me questions like that. You guys know, like, I'm not going to hide and say, if you truly feel you're worthless, then kill yourself. Like,
Well, but then you have Nietzsche, who's kind of like a life affirming pessimist, which is kind of what made him interesting, right? And like, in a way, it made him endearing and being a dick.
That, Kayla, real quick, that's what he thought that that pre-Socratic or Hellenistic Greek culture was. He thought that Greek culture from that era was tragic yet life affirming. So they sort of believed in strength and beauty and the beauty of life, but they also sort of like always wove in that tragic end to life, that it always has this natural rise and fall.
And he wasn't completely wrong. I mean, there's artwork after artwork of deliver yourself on the shield or with it. there was this modality. I mean, historically accurate rendition of the Spartan life that said, "Here's the shield. Like, don't come back if you're not going to be under it or on it or carrying it, etc." And that was like the most based take I've ever seen in ancient times. It's like you have the will to power. You yourself are the strength. You give yourself strength from your own people. And if you don't have that, if you don't will that into existence, then
Well,
I'll find you on your shield.
Isn't that just egotism? You know? Like,
Yeah, that's funny. It's funny. Like, I see, and this is the second attack I'm going to do on Keith Woods. But like, weak people are the only people that I've ever seen contest Nietzschean viewpoints. Like,
Yeah.
physically weak people.
Well, it's like the beta males who don't want to
Or
accept the
Christians.
alpha beta male construct, right? It's like the super betas go, no, there's no such thing as an alpha or a beta. It's kind of like the same thing with the master slave morality, right? It's like they don't want to accept that there is this distinction in ways of thinking. Perhaps the same thing would be true of the slaves, where they go, well, no, it's not that there are masters and slaves or whatever, that they're predators and herbivores. It's just they're the good people, and then there are the bad people, the mean people, and those people are few and far between. But they don't really see the hierarchy itself, right? They're kind of like standing in the midst of it, and they don't recognize it. So I see the same thing with like kind of same type of thing, where we also see that like soy boys tend to be communists because they need some sort of system that rejects hierarchy.
Not only hierarchy, but conflict in general.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in conflict in general, I mean, demarks an ideal of strength versus weakness. Like, conflict itself says one will survive above the other. The weakest of our populations will always say, no, we are all the same. Obviously, we're all the same. There's no delineation. I mean, obviously, if you just say certain things, you have a higher survival potential. That does not exist in reality. It does not exist in nature. That does not exist anywhere outside of the minds of those who are in the catacombs of the ivory tower.
Yeah, kind of. I was liking the tangent and line of thought that you and Kayla were going on. So if you guys want to continue down that, feel free.
we're
Where were we?
no, I mean, like, and I know we were talking about this earlier, and it kind of got like brought up for half a second, right? What was Keith referring to? Was it collective egotism? Was that it?
That was the word that he used for what others might call like racial tribalism.
Right. But then also it seemed that, in a way he was making an appeal towards like some form of like aristocracy, right? I mean, whether with him it would be like theocratic or not, but nonetheless, right, it's egotistical of the individual to think that the collective depends on their strength, right? But at the same time, that line of thinking would actually go towards building in some, actual hierarchy. You would go towards building the top of it. Right?
Yeah, speaking of like hierarchy, yeah, it was those people that created the civilizations that people thrived under. It wasn't just a group of weak men saying we should all be weak that a group thrived under. It was one person saying, I am the predominant figure that you must follow. And that is what made people thrive. There was no other thing that made that happen.
Yeah, this is what Kayla and I had in a conversation earlier. We were kind of getting at was that if you want to have a strong group, you need to have strong leaders. And to get strong in leaders, you have to some degree foster the individual, right? So this is where like hierarchy, aristocratic mindset, the National Socialist philosophy. This is where all these things kind of merge, and you sort of resolve the conflict between individual and collective, because you want to have the system where there's a collective but the collective exists in a sort of pyramidal hierarchy. And additionally, I mean, maybe it can be a little more decentralized. Maybe it doesn't need to just be a pyramid, but ultimately you have a hierarchical system, and to have strong leaders, you need to have individuals sort of reach for their own greatness to be able to ascend the ranks and become the leader. If you go fully collectivist, and there's no reason for people to pursue any of their own interest, then you tend to end up with people that are kind of soft. So you want to sort of foster the individual fire so that people are hungry and ambitious and want to lead and all that, but you also need to keep that within the bounds of a collective. So I sort of see like this aristocratic type of thinking being like what resolves the individual collective dichotomy that we're always fucking going in circles about arguing, right? This is like where we kind of get hung up on the right wing with the individualism versus collectivism stuff.
Yeah, I don't get hung up on it because I remember even Will talking about this, like the lone wolf is going to die if he's not part of a tribe. If he's not part of a group of a hierarchy, he's going to die. Obviously,
a group of friends, you could say.
Yeah, a group of friends, and this exists in survival itself. Like it first. Here's how I put that hierarchy into perspective. Survival, of course, stems from yourself, and then from that, if you have a firm grasp of that, if you have some rationality behind it, you surviving, you're going to be able to have a family. That family should survive if you have a grasp of your own foundational survival, if you have your own imperative of survival, and then to that extends the group, the outward group, the people that you don't even know, but are tangentially part of your own survival group. And that comes with responsibility. That comes with like this fact that without myself, without my family, and without you, I'm not going to survive. And this systemically comes into contrast with Foucault's ideas, which, by the way, was the father of gay, but I won't get into that too much. These people who independently perceive themselves as the prospect of their own survival are inevitably going to fail if they don't extend that survival outcome to a group they're involved with. Like even our group, even our small group, like I would definitely give survival elements to you guys to make sure that you survive, because in turn that would equate to my own survival. That does not exist in Christianity. That does not exist in modernity itself. That's a responsibility kind of feat. Responsibility feats come when you recognize that there's a natural element that exists, that survival is itself the natural element that exists, and that if you don't have a firm grasp of it yourself, you're not going to extend that from yourself, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yes. Should have done a drinking game where anytime you mention survival.
That's what I said. That's what I said earlier. I said I'm gonna mention survival a lot, and
and no one would be standing. No one would even be sitting. Here or the audience, everyone would just
said it 7 times. I think I said it 7 times. So yeah, I think you're right.
So you guys are saying that if people focus too much on moral objectivism and not actually surviving, they won't even be around to morally pontificate in the first place, because they'd be wiped
100%.
out.
100%.
A good example of this is like how feminism isn't self-replicating because feminists don't have kids. So if your group becomes feminist, you just sort of lose out to other groups that aren't feminist, like how white women are just, embracing feminism, but they're just going to end up being replaced by Mexican women who just want to be housewives.
I blame Christianity, but you already know that.
So whatever belief system that you have, it has to be self-replicating to survive, right? Like it has to sort of feed the survival and replication imperative. Otherwise, it's just going to be just a death spiral. And that's something important to look at too. And this is why like religious people, of course, outproduce non-religious people and all that.
I would say in pagan terms, like your own progeny equate to your own veneration of your own ancestors. It's like a self-replicating thing, just like you were saying. It's not that like, okay, I had 4 children, that's gonna make blacks like way less likely to survive because there's 4 more white children on this planet. Oh heavens forbid. But in paganism, like, yeah, I mean, you're venerating your ancestors, you're progenerating, you're creating the future of your own people, you're creating the future of your own history. That's immortality. That's like a soft definition of immortality.
So I think my takeaway from this conversation is that within your own in-group, you definitely want some sort of moral code. I don't think that you then take that a step further and say, oh my God, we have to have an absolute morality, otherwise our movement is going to fall apart. No, I can still accept that I don't believe in absolute morality. That when you're trying to claim anything as an absolute, what you're doing in essence is you're saying this specific viewpoint is superior. This specific viewpoint is the right one. And basically it is an assertion of power. Well, why should somebody listen to you and accept that's the right way to look at something? Well, basically because you're in a position of power over them to get them to, or perhaps maybe by looking at things your way, maybe they'll get some more power. Maybe they'll be able to perform a task better. But ultimately, like, I do absolutely accept this notion that truth and power have a sort of inner linkage, that when you're stating something is objectively true, that there is a power relation going on there. You are sort of in a way oppressing the other by forcing them to view things from your angle.
Yeah.
And this is what Foucault gets into, and what put Foucault on the map, I guess, for 21st century philosophy. Now, Foucault is a flaming fag. He's really
a bit of a pedophile. I don't know
And
if you
he's
wanna-
French.
He's disgusting. He's a disgusting person, but he did get to one of these revelations, just like how Schopenhauer, right? Even though he was kind of like this despicable human, he picked up on one of the essential truths, which is this idea of like the world as will or whatever, that Nietzsche then takes and turns into a positive. I think that we absolutely have to accept this idea that society is a series of power relations, just in the way that Foucault put it, and the way that the leftists sort of embrace it. They do accept this mode of viewing society as a series or system of power relations, and that gives them a competitive advantage over the way that we're thinking. They look at a corporation, they look at a family, it doesn't matter, they look at any sort of structure, social structure in society, and they map out the power relations. And we need to stop being such being pussies about that stuff, because we go, oh no, I don't want to see the world in that way. Well, you know what? If our enemies are seeing things in that way, and it's making them more powerful, we need to be adaptive, and we need to be able to pick this stuff up as well. And I don't think that viewing human society as power relations is going to like harm us, unless we're stuck in this world where we're trying to get back to like a Christian morality or something where we can just turn our blinders on and not see it that way. Perhaps ultimately,
which wouldn't even happen, by the way, because Christian morality depends on itself, a egalitarian mindset. It wouldn't even happen. If that was to happen, that would be the
That's right.
Oh, that's not real Christianity, bro.
The way that I see all these different systems or all these different ways of looking at things is just they're just like tools. They're just mental frameworks. They're just constructs that can help you see things in a different way and get different or new information. So, when I'm talking about like looking at Foucault, taking Foucault's version of looking at the world or looking at human society as a series of power relations, I'm seeing that as that's like putting on thermal goggles and seeing something that you haven't seen before. Is that the absolute truth? Is that the only way to look at it? No, but you need to sort of integrate and ingest all these different. Well, sorry, let me roll that back. We need to integrate and ingest all these different ways that the leftists see the world, because ultimately they're fucking kicking our asses. And we,
Yeah, and I would say like people like the left look at Foucault and they're like, that's a representation of our ideals, and they enact that representation with some really degenerate things. But if we were to take even Nietzschean's perspective, that would be abhorrent. That would be anti-natal. That would be everything against what Nietzsche would say is a positive. And that's like that's the thing that you're talking about, like this balance of like looking at these different philosophers and being like, well, let's come to a third position. Some would be pro-survival. Some, if you enacted them, would be empowering, I guess you would say. Empowering.
yeah.
Like you're empowering the individual, you're empowering the family, you're empowering this concept of survival. You're empowering this concept of natural element that this one group seems to might maybe have above other groups. And that sounds white supremacist, but just saying.
Isn't bro, getting real edgy there.
You know,
When you guys say
edgy.
that, actually, let me pose this to Will. Will, you kind of get into this stuff where you have like you get into like all these different fictions where it's like these kind of aristocratic. What am I trying to get at? Will like shit like the Sopranos, or not the Sopranos. What am I trying to say? The Godfather. There we go.
Godfather.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, shit like the Godfather, right? Where basically you're dealing with like an aristocratic system, meaning it's hierarchical. There's a clearly defined in-group and out-group. There are rival competing factions. Morality goes out the window for victory, right? This is like kind of. I think the reason people like The Godfather so much is because they look at that structure of the mafia and they go, well, basically that is what human society is. And that's just sort of a microcosm of how the entire world works.
And very similar to how imperial fucking Rome worked. Like I'm power, you are weak. I'm going to exact my implementation of ideals on you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone
but I
likes
think
The
that's
Godfather except Godfather 3 because they tried to bring it back to exactly what we're talking about, this sort of like universal moralism, and Godfather 3 was dog shit. It was
Which,
the
by the
worst
way,
fucking
is how
trilogy.
Rome failed. I don't know if anyone knows that, but Rome failed because it became multicultural, because their power became so exacting.
Wait, your argument is Rome failed because moral objectivism?
No, because of basically projecting moral objectivism on every other race on the planet.
well, I do like agree with Foucault or the leftists on this when you say that projecting moral objectivism is a form of dominating another person or group. If when Europeans went to Africa and sort of pushed their way of seeing the world on them, that was like an act of superiority. That was basically saying, our way, we are superior to you, and this is our way of seeing the world, and you're going to follow it. And that was kind of like that I can see how the leftists interpret that as an aggression.
All they really
And I
needed,
don't.
I guess, was Catholicism, and they'd be just fine.
Yeah, they would have advanced just as quickly as Europe. Yeah.
Well, they definitely didn't have Catholicism after 450 AD, I think.
Yeah, Will's joking about the E. Michael Jones take that Africa would would have been better than Europe if it was Catholic.
Now that Kale is here, please elaborate on my question to E. Michael Jones and his response.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend the next 3 hours reading your question. I have to decline.
It was a long question. You're right. It was a long question.
But what I want to do is I want to take these analysis that the left sort of uses to attack us, and I just want to say yes to them. I just want to shrug my shoulders and go, you know what, you're right. We did colonize the world, and us trying to push European ways of thought and medicine and this and that, this kind of in its own way was an act of supremacy. Okay. And guess what? Yeah, maybe the world is just a series of power relations. So what, right? Ultimately, like I am willing to accept these truths from these radical leftists, or Keith is calling them all lumping them into modernism in his video. He's calling them all modernists because that's what came before postmodernism. But I mean, it doesn't really, like, I don't feel threatened by the revelations that they have. And I think that we should all just integrate them and move on. instead of trying to constantly try to resist them. Or you know what the Civnats do, which is the cringiest thing ever, is they try to pretend that the left has no real power, or they try to like laugh at all these things and say, "Oh, it's so ridiculous. Can you believe that this is how they view the world? Ha 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 ha."
Or on the
That's
outset,
so stupid and lame.
Or on the outset is I am threatened by your presupposition that I am anything but an egalitarian, and therefore I can't quite refute what you're saying, but I'm gonna be antagonistic towards it, 100%.
Well, this is why
Yeah.
the Civnats are going to be in for a rude awakening once Trump relinquishes, not really relinquishes, but once Trump is out of office, they're going to be in for a rude awakening.
Well, my final
Yes,
point
my-
on all this is that we've got to adapt, we've got to integrate, we've got to incorporate. We can't just keep going in this mode of going derp derp derp. Left thinks this is
Well,
obviously stupid, obviously wrong. I don't even need to prove it. I think that we've got to adopt all of this and pull this all into our worldview. So
That was the
anyway,
thing. I always thought, like, especially lately, being a reactionary was frowned upon.
yeah.
And
Oh,
yet,
yeah,
what are people being?
Yeah, so that's kind of what Kayla's point here is that Keith is saying, well, the elites are Nietzschean, so obviously we can't be that. Well, isn't that kind of like the kind of reactionary thinking that we've been trying to rail against?
Dude,
Maybe
that's the same reactionary thought that Christians have with Satanism. If the elites push this sort of satanic messaging, that must mean that Christianity is the ultimate truth. Therefore, we have to be reactive in our metaphysics.
Also, I will just say that it's a reduction to it's basically reductio ad absurdum. It's basically saying anyone who is powerful is doing something wrong. That nature itself is wrong because you are wielding that power above someone else, which is against my objective morality, which is also stupid because there is no objective morality.
I think that's
I'm
what
going to
Dag
say the
is
exact
getting at.
opposite, and I'm going to agree with you, Grizzly, and say the exact opposite. That anyone in power is doing something right. When you look at somebody who has power, look,
Well,
okay,
that's
I
what I
get
meant.
it.
I mean, I'm using.
You don't have to.
I'm using Keith's mindset on this matter.
No. I'm totally agreeing with you on this one, but I'm trying to make the point that when we look at people in power, we have to accept that whatever you might be able to laugh at them. Maybe they've got all sorts of flaws, but they wouldn't have that power unless they were doing something right. It doesn't need to be all things. You don't need to think that they're superior to you, but you have to accept that there is some source of that, and they've probably done something. They're doing something right. And in this case, I'm trying to kind of correlate that to maybe some of these leftist thought patterns, or not even leftist, but some of these ways of seeing the world that the elite have are ultimately more predatory than the way that the masses think. And that rather than saying, and like Keith Woods is doing in his video, which is just kind of complaining, oh, we need an elite that doesn't think like this. We need
exactly when you bring up the idea of idealism itself, that's a subjective modality. I mean, it's like it's. I'm sorry, Keith, if you're listening, it's stupid. It's stupid. Like no one's going to agree with you on your subjective idealistic nature of mankind. No one's going to do that unless you've indoctrinated them. I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen, especially with like the dissident right who are like looking at nature as nature itself and saying this isn't possible. Like what you're saying is completely antithetical to anything I've ever come across in reality. I mean, that's just stupid. It's stupid.
Yeah. Well, to finish that off, what Keith tries to say in his video is that we need populism, and that the elites have already integrated some Nietzschean thought, and therefore that's part of the problem of modernity. And to that, I've got to say, we instead of trying to say that, oh, the masses are going to have this, we're going to have this populist uprising against the elites, or we need the elites to like us, or we need to take our objective truth moral claims to the public square and argue for why we need fair treatment. I think all of that goes out the window, and we have to sort of just accept that the only way that we could ever possibly fix this shithole situation is if we were to become the elites. And yes, when we would become the elites, we would likely employ a lot of the same tactics that they use. Let me ask you guys, we've all kind of talked about this in private, but do you guys believe in free speech?
No. Sounds.
No.
Do you even need me to answer that?
Why not, guys? Why not?
Of course not.
Why should I?
So why then do we try to argue for free speech when we're dealing with, these platforms like YouTube and Twitter and whatever? Why are we arguing for free speech if we don't really believe
I think
in
it's
it?
a good strategy because most of the masses believe in free speech, and even though we don't necessarily believe in free speech, if you're kind of taking it through a populist lens to get more popular support behind us, not getting deplatformed, I think that's sort of the strategy.
Yeah, I would say
behind that.
this goes into the NSDAP. Is that right?
Obviously, we're not going to give free speech to these fucking Antifa scum. If we had power, like we would not give them free speech. So
if we had our ethno state, would you let communist agitators put up flyers at your college? No.
So that's the simplicity of what I was saying. It's based on survival. Of course, if my survival basically revolved around the reduction of someone else's speech, I would obviously enact that. I would obviously do that.
Yeah.
And that's the one
Grizzly's,
thing that
Grizzly's talking about helicopter rides for journalists right now. If you guys can't read between the lines.
Without Fed posting, yeah, kind of. But I would say, like, if you are involved in a concept of the 14 words, or a concept of survival of your own people, or the survival of your ethnic group, or your whatever group that you're in, you're a part of, I would say obviously you would do whatever that took to survive.
Lugenpresse continental removalism,
like continental reductionist mindset, which there's a guy. There was a guy that used to poke fun at because he talked about continents and stuff like that, and I was like, there's no continents. It's just we're all connected.
Who's that wild wolf guy that was talking about
some wild wolf guy? And in the end, like, basically, if something threatened my survival, I would want that to be removed. And who outside of a Christian wouldn't want that? Or actually, that's not even true. Like, there's some Christians of a different ethnic faiths or different ethnic backgrounds that would be like, yes, remove them with no compunction. It is one group on this planet that says, my own survival is not necessary. It's your survival. But the funny thing is, and this is my Nietzschean perspective, there was no other group on this planet, no survival element regarding the survival of trees and animals and planets that exist without our own survival. And yes, that sounds a bit supremacist, but I'm also going to just back that up by science. In the 20th, the 19th, and 21st century, it is Americans, it is Europeans that have advocated for the survival of other races, endangered species, more than any others. So basically, I would contest that if you promoted or if you accelerated the idea that Europeans should not exist, or they should exist in much more confined spaces, or with a reductionist populace, I would say then you're defeating your own leftist purpose of environmental survivalism, because that's what we do. Anyway, we're the best, is my point. We're the best.
I can agree that we are the best.
You guys are awesome. So did we get to the entire segment yet, or did you?
I think we're about 20. I think we talked about 27 out of 35 minutes of it.
I do have one last quote. I have one last quote, if I could read it.
Oh, hold up. The last thing that happened at about the 25-minute mark was he started saying that the Ubermensch ideal is not trad. And I think he's right about that, but I don't really see why you would put why you would put being trad over over like self-overcoming or humanity or like human beings getting to a greater state. I don't think I'm that sort of traditionalist where I wouldn't want to overcome human limitations.
You know what's funny is the concept of traditionalism is survival of your own people and what they did before you existed. Like that is a survival.
Well, don't you have to evolve to survive? Isn't there an element of evolution within survival?
I mean, not in the sense that we're talking about within the last 10,000 years. I'm just saying what he's basically proposing in some of these things. And yes, what's your name? Keith Woods. I'm saying this to you right now. Your little Emerald Island is not going to survive with your viewpoint of imperialism or idealism. It's not going to survive. You have to be stronger than those that are injected into your society, the English or the third worlders or whatever. You have to be stronger, otherwise you're not going to survive. That's the case.
Indeed. And Keith Woods and people like that, they live inside a little hug box, and they're never going to go outside of that and have actual, honest, open dialogue with people like me, because they know they will be made to look like idiots. And so people like that and Eric Stryker, they want to maintain this narrative that there's some intellectual heavyweights, when in fact the things they say are Reddit tier arguments where, like, I watched a YouTube video and now I'm an expert on philosophy, or I read a Reddit page and now I know enough to critique the body of work that Nietzsche put out, or the body of work that Marx put out.
Yeah, that's the thing, Drango. Though my entire purpose of existing is showing a group of people their survival imperative and saying, if you don't do something, you're lost. If you do something, you might have a chance. And when I look at his last argument, when I look at his contextual nature of like saying, hey, Nietzsche, you're wrong about your concepts. I look at that and I say, I also look at this body structure. That's my third personal attack on Keith Woods, and I say you're basically giving your entire civilization away, and you're not doing anything about it other than like saying there's some kind of philosophical argument against it. Congratulations, you've evoked, or you've invoked the concept of, I don't know, some archaic philosopher. Congratulations, you're smart. But that doesn't equate to the survival of your people, which it should. Everything you do should equate to the survival of your people, your family, yourself, your group, your in-group. That's what it should do. If anything else is against that, then it's wrong. And that's what Nietzsche would say.
Yeah. And something one of my favorite philosophers, Immanuel Kant, said is that survival is not a bed of roses.
No, there's other.
That's a joke, by the way.
I was gonna say Kant never said that, dude.
Kant never said that.
That was Castro.
There's military leaders. There's military leaders that said, like, we have to fuel the bed of freedom with blood every now and then, or we have to fuel the roots of freedom with blood.
Are you fucking quoting Thomas Jefferson or something?
Was that Alex Jones?
Water the tree of liberty with the blood of patriots.
Yeah, we have to do that. We have to do that sometime, and sometimes that does not just revolve around fucking Tea Party. That does not revolve around 1776ism. It revolves around the survival of your own people. Yes, sometimes you have to spill blood for the future of your own people. Shocker. That's what it would take.
Actually, there's a comment in the chat that says nature is Nietzschean, and I'd actually disagree and say that not that it's not similar, but that what Nietzsche was trying to do is deconstruct the non-natural philosophical concepts like the man-made ideas and bring us back to a more natural state of thinking and operating. Essentially, the will to power is a very important concept that goes against liberalism. It is the most illiberal and natural principle. And so I wouldn't say like nature is Nietzschean. I would say that Nietzsche tried to quantify nature and
yes,
100% an illiberal.
Yeah, 100%.
So
I don't think anyone has an embodiment of nature or a mindset behind nature. I I think there's some philosophers that were aligned with the natural precepts of survive or die, and some people that were like idealists. Like I guess this one guy is trying to do, which doesn't really work out because it's not really working out for his own people.
It's really funny because idealism is like, obviously I don't like Kant, that was a joke, but like idealism, like from coming from Kant and even some aspects of Hegel is antithetical like to objective morality in so many ways, because like idealism says that we create the world around us in our mind. Like that's the core principle of idealism. You know, like the early idealists talked about how a pencil is only a pencil because I deem it as a pencil and perceive it as a pencil, right? And so they're like the ultimate like subjective reality types, but somehow these people make this false correlation that idealism is somehow in line with objectivity, and it's completely like diametrically opposed.
You know, and some people will be like, "Oh, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?" Or what comes first, your own mindset before your own people's mindset? I would say the basic structure of your own thought process regarding any of these philosophical ideals would be what promotes survival for yourself, what promotes survival for your family, what promotes survival for your group. If anything is against any one of those precepts, it's not something you should follow.
Yeah, exactly. And something else I'd like to really add on to it is that the ideas don't stop with people, right? And so like it's really easy to like maybe like become a Nietzschean or something like that, which I would say that's that is kind of I don't think it's a positive progression, right? You build off the ideas and the people that are going in the correct direction for you and for your people, and so you don't become those philosophies or
Agreed.
become the embodiment of it. What you do is you take the ideas that work and take the ideas that ring true, because no man is fallible, or no man is infallible. Every man is fallible. So there are certain
Absolutely.
concepts and certain ideas that are wrong, certain thought processes that have to be thrown out, and some that are taken. But the idea of it is to build upon rather than stagnate and become too fixated and reactionary on a single idea that you lose momentum.
I completely agree with that. And I tried to say something
Same.
similar earlier in the show where I'm like, there's nobody in history who's ever had all the answers that could lay out some sort of heuristic that we could follow till the end of time. Every person has limitations. Every belief system has limitations. The only way is to keep them ever evolving, ever adapting, always looking on the horizons for new ways of thinking, new bits of information, and like keep marching forward. What Keith is saying is that he sees the right as being at sort of a fork in the road where it goes to sort of like this potentially, like, I don't know if it's like tradcath thinking that he's getting at, or like an E. Michael Jones type of thing where we're kind of Christian, but we're not practicing Christians, but we believe in cultural Christianity and the Logos. And then he sees on the other side of it, then there's like, then there's will to power and moral subjectivity on the other side. And I know what side I'm going to lean towards. I know what side is going to give us the competitive advantage in the race war, which is of course already begun.
Yeah, and I would say it's not even subjective or objective. I'm sorry. Did I cut someone?
Yeah, really quickly, I'll just add on to what Dagus was saying is that if you have a really strong belief in something, say that you have a really strong belief in the morality and the practice of Christianity, or you have a really strong belief in the morality and practice of paganism. Either way, if you hold those strong beliefs and you believe that society would be better under those principles, then you must reject the idea that morality is objective. You must move on to the fact that morality comes from power structure. And when you do that, you realize that if you truly do believe in your system that it would help society, it is your imperative to gain power and enforce that morality, right? And so
I'll take that a step
I think
further.
that was one of the points that Keith was actually did we already cover this, Dagus? I'm not sure if we skipped over that, but to address what Dranger was saying, Keith did invoke that point of intellectuals being the ones who were kind of the arbiters of truth in the society. And Jenger makes a good point.
Well,
Is that
he,
that
he
is
likened Nietzscheans into like people who rated modern
yeah.
art forms, like modern videos or modern movies or modern things like that. And they said these are the Nietzscheans, and like you couldn't be further from the truth. Like how his idea is that we are materialists. Like that is what I assume from watching his 36-minute video is that he believes that people who are Nietzschean or people who have looked into Nietzsche or Nietzsche or
They have
studied
no
Nietzsche,
metaphysics.
they
Was
have
his
no
assertion.
metaphysics. It's 100% materialistic. There's no other delineating factor between reading Nietzsche and his Catholic viewpoint or his Christian viewpoint or whatever it may be. I don't even know what he is. Like maybe he's just agnostic. I don't really know. But one thing I would say is like there is absolutely nothing within the writings of Nietzsche that would promote some kind of concept of we're stagnant. We're stagnant beings. We have this ideal that we should pursue, or we have this negligent that we should pursue. With Nietzsche, like I think, and again, I'm harping on this. And you can make fun of me for it, but it's survival. It's basically what is survival. If something is more survival than counter survival or against survival, then pursue that thing that is more survival. Obviously, that is rational. That is survival. That is like what you should do as a person advocating for your own people. Like there is no other weird thing that you should consider. There's no other like concept or philosophy that you should even like partake in. Like
Survival at
sure,
all costs, no matter what.
yeah, especially now. We're what 7% of the population, 8% of the population. We don't have room to just say that we should survive. We don't have room to argue that we should survive. The only room we have is saying we will survive, and this is how we're going to do it. We will survive. This is how we're going to pursue it. We will survive, and I don't care what you say. This is my
Is that an
intention.
Aretha
Indeed.
Franklin song, or?
No, but I completely agree with that, and the sentiment of that I try to fully espouse and pretty much and apply it to all things, but well, not but and kind of adding on to that a little bit. I just blanked. I had a really
That's
good
okay.
point. I swear, I had a great point. What were you saying, Grizzly? Survive.
I was saying the only thing that you should pursue is the survival of your people and yourself. If you pursue anything else, than just
Yeah.
that fundamental value of I am going to survive, or my kid is going to survive, or my family is going to survive,
Yeah,
you're
okay,
doing
I
it
remembered
wrong.
I remembered it now. What I was going to say when you were saying that is, and this obsession with logos, right? I have a really strong problem with that because logos is word. It means like discourse, right? And so the greatest power that this like liberal idea has is that you can through discourse reach a more, a better state, sort of a synthesis of a state, right? You can advocate for your idea, and in a sort of like Platonic or Socratic dialectic, you can reach some sort of agreement. But unfortunately, due to modern censorship, logos is impossible. Logos is in complete control of the system and their radical left cronies, and so you do not have the power of discourse. You do not have the power
Can I give
liberal
a quick
talk. And so what you're left
uh,
with, if you're going to just sit there and scream about logos, you're not going to achieve anything. You will never win.
Exactly. Can I real quick before you finish your
It's a
thing?
red herring.
Yeah, before you finish your thing, I want you to finish your thing. I'm just interrupting you rudely, real quick, to say the etymology of logos means
This
knowledge.
is so unlike you, Grizzly. You never interrupt people.
I know, I never interrupt, but the etymology of logos means knowledge, and it's a very hierarchical system. Like if someone says this is knowledge, that means logos. So if someone said like fucking 2,000 years ago, this is logos, that means knowledge. Obviously, that's knowledge. That's what we should pursue. Anyway,
I was
go
always
ahead.
under the impression that logos meant it does pertain to knowledge, but it's like knowledge that's gained through hearty discourse, basically. Like they would say like philologos would be the discourse surrounding philosophy, or you know, all those different ones, you know.
Dranger, you brought up the the Twilight of the Idols early on in the conversation, and that was
Yeah.
one of the big criticisms Nietzsche had of philosophy in general, and Plato and Socrates and Plato, was that he thought that these two figures sort of launched the Greek rationalism, which ended up replacing the more like spiritual side, or like basically Greek rationalism ended up replacing Greek aesthetics. When we think back to what ancient Greece was today, we think of, you know, the democracy and the discourse happening in Athens, and sort of this mode of always being obsessed with trying to find the rational proof for truth. And what Nietzsche argued in Twilight of the Idols, after just kind of making fun of Plato and Socrates for being, you know, ugly and whatever.
And he called them very astutely the decadence of Rome, or no, the decadence of Greece, and that the Romans were smart enough to really reject a lot of their ideas and basically say that was crazy, and so he was very in Beyond Good and Evil. There at the beginning, he sort of very quickly goes in on all of those different philosophers and just briefly touches on it, but in Twilight of the Idols, he goes in depth and really eviscerates them brutally, very brutally.
Just, the whole book is just a roast of everyone who came before him in history,
except for Thucydides.
Maybe, and I think Heraclitus gets it easy.
Reminds me of what Dranger's been doing to a lot of the E-celebs in our circles since
hey
the
guys,
David Duke
just
fiasco.
let you know, I'm just here to make sure you're all surviving okay in here.
Base skinny coming here with the pure puritanical Nietzschean belief of survival. Thank you.
No, he's just a fan of disco.
I'll finish off my point on that this goes back to two things that Keith said. One is that Nietzsche is kind of anti-intellectual, or there's an air of anti-intellectualism around him. And then two, that when people sort of go down this train of thought, they have to start they sort of drop rationality, or they drop trying to make the moral claim to have the absolute truth, and they start tapping into the world of aesthetics. And Nietzsche was pretty explicit that he thought that aesthetics were way stronger, that Greek statues and plays and heroism were so much more powerful than argumentation and dialectic.
Yeah, but to kind of touch on that, he specifically talks about something very refreshing about him. He kind of very astutely and prophetically predicted the critiques of himself before they came to be, and so that people do call him an anti-intellectual of sorts, but he actually addresses that in Twilight of the Idols and says that what modern people consider intellectualism is just a farce and is a bunch of fart sniffing, basically, and that true intellectualism is what he's talking about. He specifically said that the modern people were anti-intellectual, even in the highest levels of intellect. The highest philosophers were anti-intellectualists, and they were pure, con artists. And so he kind of, the pursuit of aesthetics and senses, in what he was talking about, is like true intellectualism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this idea, like that Plato and Socrates were able to hang out in the court of Athens all day, every day, their whole lives, or most of their adult lives, and just sit around and discourse with people. What is that the equivalent of? That's the equivalent of somebody being a NEET and spending all day, every day on Discord. I mean, literally, like that is the ancient equivalent of maybe the modern phenomenon. We give it all sorts of glory because some tradition came out of it. But if Plato were alive today, would he not just be like a dude sitting on Discord debating people 24/7?
And Homer, don't forget Homer.
Well, that's completely different. But
anyways, yeah, no, I totally agree. I think Dranger is pretty accurate in his assumption of modality in terms of like these philosophers. And I would say, like, organically speaking, like if someone was to be believed or conceived as accurate or like a head of knowledge, it would have to. It basically you'd have to show something that agreed with a predominant group of individuals. Like
So, really quickly, before we get too far away from what Dagos was saying, of Plato and Socrates and those sorts of decadent philosophers being the ones that would be sitting, or modern day, they would be sitting around, arguing with people on Discord all day. And Diogenes would be the one in the chat sending poop emojis.
throwing shit, yeah, literal shit.
He would
Like,
just be sending
he'd
poop
be like,
emojis.
he'd be like, what's your PO box? Because I have like a gallon of piss I'm gonna send to you.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good. So yeah, so I think the idea here, the takeaway, is that type of intellectualism, idealism itself, because Plato is sort of the maybe perhaps the first idealist in philosophy, is that can be a very like masturbatory thing. It can be something where you sort of just live in your own head. You just kind of go in circles all day, every day, never really interface with reality, and then you spend your whole life trying to build this perfect intellectual construct that isn't really all that useful and doesn't really do anything.
You know, Socrates would look at Diogenes and be like, "You're a degenerate. Like, look at you. You're just pissing and shitting, and you're living with dogs, and whatever you say is like anti-intellectual." And then he just go hobnob with his super intellectual people in Rome. You're like, "Look, like these guys, or Greece," and he'd be like, "Hey, these guys don't know anything. Like Diogenes, look at him. He's hanging out with dogs. Look, obviously." Nothing that he says is like you should take for granted. Like nothing that he says should be like a part of your like mental capacity.
You'd be like, yeah, that's a great point, but do you even wipe, bro?
Do you even wipe, bro? And he'd be like, no, I'm not a fucking bipedal, chicken. No.
Hey, Dranger, you've listened to the Yaki Imperium audiobook, right?
A few times, yeah.
I know you disliked Alex Linder's commentary in that one, but there was one thing that Alex Linder brings up in one of these, and he starts talking about like what the life of Jewish intellectuals was like, and like the, I don't know if he was talking about the Frankfurt School or critical theory or something, but he starts kind of going into how these Jewish intellectuals organized and lived life, and it kind of sounded like the court, like the city square of Athens, with just a bunch of people at a bunch of different tables just debating all day, every day, and not actually doing anything with their lives. And he was saying this was sort of like, I don't know if this was the Frankfurt School. I'd have to re-listen, but he's kind of talking about like this being like decadent Jewish intellectualism, that they don't do anything but debate all day.
Yeah, and I think it was mentioned that Nietzsche even made like a backhanded reference to it, that I believe it was Socrates that went and studied in Alexandria. He studied philosophy in Alexandria, and it's more than likely that he's studied underneath Jewish philosophers.
Ooh, that is interesting.
Yep.
Guys, everyone wish Yaki a happy birthday.
Congrats.
Yeah,
Yaki.
Caleb brought it to my
Birthday.
attention that it's Jackie's birthday.
I had no idea.
Well, depending on what
Wait.
coach you're on, it either is or it isn't. But
So let's get some wise in chat, if there's even anyone still listening.
We still have a surprising number of
You
people
have a
that are still
22
with
amount
us.
of people. Or
what's
22
wrong
21
with
people.
you?
What is wrong with all of you?
What's wrong with
Yeah.
you?
Fucking losers.
How dare you leave?
What are you doing?
How dare.
It's a Friday night. What are you doing, guys? What are you doing listening to us?
Someone downvoted the stream. Someone downvoted the stream already. I can't even imagine that.
I was right as we started dabbing on him. No, Keith came in here and he's the one down.
Yeah, there's a Radix fan showed up.
Well, okay. So to stay on topic, but to go in a different direction, this looks like kind of a split of Keith and Spencer, because Spencer's definitely like very Nietzschean in the way he speaks. Yeah, he's cringe. Yeah, he's flamboyant, whatever. But Spencer does very
He's flaming.
carefully choose his words, and he does make sure that he sort of speaks in Nietzschean moral terms. He doesn't fall into like boomerisms and stuff that we like to make fun of. He's very, very careful about the words he chooses.
It's really unfortunate. I wish he was
More cringe.
not. I wish he was not. No. I wish he was not talking about these concepts because it immediately induces
It cringifies the topic.
quite
It's
so.
Dude,
so
I've already voted in advance for Richard Spencer for what he said.
when you try to talk any form of discourse in like the general discourse of like whatever this is that we're in, but anyways, if you try to talk to try to bring up the idea of like Dionysian principles, or you try to bring up Apollonian principles, and it's like, well, they've been astroturfed by goofs, and so
Yeah.
they're
It's
kind of
contagious cringism.
so you can't even talk about them honestly. You can't even talk about the merits of those ideas, or even talk about the will to power, or the concept become who you are. He bastardized that concept. He took that phrase and turned it into something completely different than what it was intended.
Here's my fourth attack on Keith Woods personally. When I look at people that criticize Nietzsche,
Embrace the hatred.
yeah, I will, and this is for you.
4 bottles of meat in, and Grizzly's true nature's coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, my true nature is nature, so yeah, obviously it's gonna come out. But when I see a bunch of fucking people who get stone cold glocked by a random black on the street, or like someone who I can arm wrestle within a heartbeat and win, like I'm like, yeah. When you look at like power dynamics, you're like, this is shit. Like I shouldn't advocate for this because I'm weak. I'm weak physically, and that's kind of comes into consideration when you look at Keith Woods' takes, or when you look at even that gay guy. What's his name? Richard Spencer, or some other guys. I'm like, I look at your takes, and I'm like, I can compare that with how you look physically, and I'm like, I know why you have those takes. And it's basically the imperialism of power that you're against, like this imperialism of I'm stronger than you, I'm gonna win, this natural element that you're against. And I understand that. Like if you're a weak, pathetic faggot, yeah, like
Oh, there goes
obviously,
the channel. Damn it.
yeah, I'd be like, yeah, if I was a weak, pathetic faggot, I'd be against what you're saying because you're advocating for strength and non-objective morality, and that's kind of offensive to me because I'm kind of weak, and I understand that. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it seems like Keith's big thing that he's been like harping on for, I don't know, 3-6 months is might makes right. It seems like that's the trigger for him. So potentially there's something to do with him being an intellectual and knowing that if we lived in a world where it really was just survival of the fittest, maybe he wouldn't be at the top. Maybe he wouldn't be one of the survivors. I don't know. He seems like a pretty smart guy. I bet he'd make it, but despite being a little scrawny.
Given the idea, like I said before, it kind of always goes back to this. People that deny might are shooting themselves in the. They're either shooting themselves in the foot because they're scared to admit that their principles do not hold merit by themselves, right? They're kind of scared of that idea that my ideas don't hold merit as this like esoteric concept, and so that frightens people because it makes them feel powerless. And then there's another aspect to it too, where certain types of people realize that if everyone found out that your ideas are only as strong or as weak as your ability to enforce them, then it would truly be a every man for himself battle to the top so that they could enforce their ideas if they truly believed in them. And so what that kind of means to me is that when people want to have a following, they want to tell people that might does not make right, that might makes right is somehow this like evil or wrong or infallible concept, when in fact they understand that the only reasons their ideas are holding any merit is because they have gained a small section of power over people, right? And so I think it's a charlatan sort of talking point that a lot of people go down with that route.
Yeah, that's well said. Similar to, well, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Fuck.
Well, I think that we're all pretty much in
Oh,
agreement here that we are against moral objectivism, and we are, you know, um,
Cool
advocates for
kids.
advocates for nature and Nietzschean concepts in general. So
totally.
I think that, like what we kind of touched on earlier, is that this concept of an esoteric and exoteric moral code is what's needed for right now, in our opinion, and that's kind of my takeaway from this.
Totally. I like the three-pronged approach that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I agree with Dagus. I think the further away you either negate yourself from observation of nature or you sublimate yourself from the observation of nature, you're doing yourself a disservice. I think the closer approach to nature that you have, like in survival imperative or in group survival, again, drinking game. Hello, drinking game.
You're killing me,
But
Chris.
I really do mean this. Like if you have such a weak thought of your own personal nature and your own group's nature and survival, then yeah, that's gonna be a bad time. But I think that none of us have that concept. None of us perceive ourselves as weak. None of us perceive ourselves as peddlers of weak nature.
Yeah, agreed.
So I
Okay,
think
what I
maybe we
meant,
should you guys getting close to wanting to wrap it up here.
yeah, I'm wanting to wrap it up. Um, the one thought that I didn't get out was what Drenger just said about intellectual constructs or abstract constructs not standing on their own. That's what I was trying to get at earlier when I was saying like this whole thing about, somebody could spend their whole life trying to build this perfect system in their head, and then ultimately it wouldn't mean or do anything. And what he said kind of flushed that out, or made a better, was a better version of what I said, with kind of like these, you can't just get lost in the intellectualism. You have to be practical. It's not
Yeah,
enough just to try to
pragmatism
come
is
up.
key.
Absolutely. And you have to take your ideas and you have to try to employ them in the world and get feedback on how well they work and test them. You can't just do it all in the containment of your own head, right? In the test chamber of your own mind. It doesn't yield good results. So that's my final thought on the topic. Too much intellectualism is a bad thing, and what we need is not more critiques of modernity, but a path to take power and action.
I agree.
Yeah, well said.
Intellectualism, bad.
However small, too. Even if we have to take power in very, very small ways, that's better than just spending our lives just talking or thinking about it. And that's it for me. Anybody else want to jump in? I know I kind of did like a closing statement, so I feel like now I've got to give you guys all closing statements.
Yeah,
I kind of did mine
do one.
already too. So Grizzly, if you wanna.
No, don't do me. I'm gonna be last.
Okay, so I'll hop right in. Sorry I missed the midsection of this. I had to deal with some stuff, but I'll just leave it off with something really simple. Might is right, whether you admit to it or not. Your ideas, concepts, morals are only as valuable as your will and or ability to enforce those values, morals, and laws upon other people. And the minute that people forget that is the minute that they become slaves.
Solid. Or what about Skinny?
Also, so another thought, really quickly, I'll just add on something onto that. Another thought, just random thought I had today, is this idea of self-reliance. I think is extremely important for what we are heading into, being personally autonomous, reliable to yourself, so that you can be, useful to others. And kind of like a little summation of that idea was like a simple phrase that just like popped into my head earlier, and it's if if you're not striving to be the master, then you are. How do I think of it? Is if you're not at all times striving to be master, if you're not at all times striving or attempting to become master, then you are already a slave. If you're okay with where you are, then you've already lost. Basically,
Don't be a stagnant bitch.
I'll just say this: moral pontification is the same thing as apathy. So exert your will and embrace nature, and that's all I got.
Moral pontification is masturbation of another kind. All right. We'll leave it at that. Thank you guys.
Wait, and go.
Oh.
Go.
Well
go,
then.
Go.
Yeah. Are you
Go.
sure?
Go.
God,
Vegas, stop trying to cull my intentions here. Okay?
dude, I'm just such an interrupter. I just can't help it.
Your voice interrupted
Grizzly.
right now.
Grizzly.
Go.
Jackie just pointed Kanye.
Go.
Grizzly, I'm gonna let you finish real quick. I'm gonna let you finish, but
Yeah, hold on, Grizzly. Wait a second. Okay, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, thanks.
I just wanted to be clear. It's your time to go. Go on.
Yeah, thanks.
The mic is yours.
All yours.
Thank you.
We're just gonna mute. Just hold on.
Well, you're not still.
Okay.
You're not still.
Everybody's still listening. Stop what you're doing. Grizzly has something to say.
Stand on your soapbox, Grizz.
I agree with everyone on this panel.
What?
Yeah, everyone on this panel I agree with.
Skinny is deeply offended by that. How dare you agree?
Why don't you guys plug your channels real quick, your Telegram channels where people can find you?
All right. Well, that wasn't my real thing. So basically, survival depends on not just yourself, but it's your own perception of what you want to survive around you. Sometimes with Christians, that depends on an agreement that egalitarianism is the best approach. Everyone having equal rights is the best approach. Everyone agreeing that lowering your own survival equals the survival of others is the best approach. But in pure survival, just as Nietzschean intended and just as nature intended, you surviving is the ultimate approach. You surviving as a family is the ultimate approach. You surviving as a people is the ultimate approach. And that's the separation, I would say. It's not hard to discern. It's not hard to kind of break down. Basically, you wanting your own people to survive is the best thing for your own people. Obviously, anything else is bad. That's it.
I have something to say, but I'll keep it short. And this will be actually the final words. Don't be a bitch is basically what this all sums up to.
Yeah, don't be a fucking bitch.
Don't be a bitch, and we'll be okay.
Don't be a fucking bitch, or else Skinny will find you.
Awesome. Does anyone have any channels they want to plug?
Yes, it's called art. It's called European Art. It's a very fine Telegram channel. Go ahead and find it.
T.me/European Art, right?
Yeah.
I'll show a channel. It's not mine, but I'll show it.
Yeah, go for it.
Activism, athletics, identity.
Awesome. Dranger, you got anything you want to show?
No.
Well, he runs a hate lab with another person, so that's
that's all. I don't like silly.
So t.me/hate lab. That's Stranger.
Indeed.
Nope. Let's call it a night. Thanks everyone, and people out there listening. I hope you guys enjoyed.
Yep. Thanks for coming.
Sorry, everyone.